Good evening, everyone. It is now 6:30, and I will call this regular work session of the Burnsville City Council to order. This is a very informal meeting, but we'll go around the table and introduce ourselves, and then we'll ask the people on the periphery to also introduce themselves.
Mary Sherry, Burnsville City Council.
Bill Coughlin, Burnsville City Council.
Jenny Faulkner, Community Development Director for the city.
Kelly Stry, Finance Director for the city.
This is Dana Hardy, Administrative Services Director. I'm Heather Johnston, the Burnsville City Manager.
Dan Keeley, City Council.
Suzanne Wynn, City Council.
Elizabeth Couts, Mayor.
Michelle Collins, City Clerk.
Peter Dean, at Sunset Pond.
Very good. Thank you for coming.
John Kessler, Sun This Week.
Welcome.
Bill Nicholas, City Resident.
Mike Dumoulin, City Resident.
John McNamara with Bold Architects and Engineers.
Don Stenger, Burnsville Police Department.
Thank you. And Dana Hardy is just walking in, and she's our Administrative Director. And the first item on the agenda is the maximum tax levy for 2017 budget discussions. And leading off that discussion this evening is Kelly Stry, our Finance Director. Kelly, welcome.
Thank you. All right. We have tonight, as we pull up the PowerPoint here, I think it'll be up here shortly. Can you see it on your side?
Yep.
Okay. There we go. Presentation. This is, there we go. Sorry for the. Thank you. All right, tonight is the council discussion about the maximum tax that you will be adopting next month in September. You've already had one meeting, June 14th, where we went through the budget pressures, the high-level anticipated numbers that we were projecting for the upcoming 2017 budget process. Staff has done some additional work, and the departments are hard at work now on their budget process, but this is some refining. We're still at a somewhat high level of detail, and departments will be bringing back the more very specific items that you'll see later on in October, November. So that's where we are in the budget process. This all leads to your very detailed discussions in November, 2 work sessions, one on the general fund and other property tax supported funds, and the second one on capital projects, your enterprise funds and that sort of thing, and leading to a December 6th adoption of the tax levies and budget. So we're early in the process. On Tuesday, September 6th, at your next meeting, you'll have an opportunity to adopt the maximum tax levy. This is what residents will see when they get their proposed property tax statements for 2017. So it is the most the property tax levy can be. You can go down from that point, but we cannot go back up. So far, there are no levy limits in place for 2017, and we do have to, by law, adopt, or by September 30th, rather, the city's property tax statement, property max tax, and September 15th for the EDA. So we just go for that September 15th deadline for both of them, since you're considering both of them. When we met in June, we were looking at a 3.7 increase in the property tax levy. We came down, albeit 0.1%. For this max tax levy, it's 3.6. There were a few changes in a few different numbers, and we'll go over those as we go on. You did see them in your council background that was sent. As I mentioned, the departments are working on their very detailed budgets, and they will continue to identify efficiency savings. And very specific savings in the departments. Their presentations to you will be October 25th. And then you receive your complete budget book on November 1st. And then as I mentioned earlier, adoption in December. It's hard to talk about December in August, but it's rolling around quickly. This slide shows you the projected 2017 levy as compared to the 2016 adopted levy, and then the increases by fund. As we showed you in June, we are still expecting the EDA to increase 25,000, and that's per your long-term plan. The debt service is remaining flat. The facility plan, last year you levied a capital levy, the one of two planned increases to the property tax levy for the facilities plan. And that, because you adopted the franchise fees earlier this year, that replaces the second increase in property tax for the facilities plan. So you'll see there is no increase in that. We had talked at one time of having, it was a capital levy last year. It will be used for debt service for the coming year, but we will still call it a capital levy. It provides some flexibility in these early years as we are, or these of the plan. Then we can work with what is debt and what is pay-go on that facilities plan. The ITF levy, that's your long-term plan, infrastructure trust fund, and it is projected to continue the $50,000 a year increase, so there was no change to that. The forestry EAB fund is a fund where we did make a change from June. Your long-term plan has been a $50,000 increase each year, and that's in preparation to take care of the problem if the emerald ash borers do arrive, or when they arrive, rather. Staff feels that the fund has had good results so far, so we are in a position where we expected to be without having the 50,000 increase for this 1 year. We, in the 5-year plan, will be showing you that we will continue that 50,000 for the future years, but that would be addressed each year. The costs of fighting the emerald ash borer have really gone down. The treatment plans are working, and the cost of treatment is going down. And also the removal of trees is going to be more spread out, or we anticipate it to be more spread out. So we feel that this is an area that we can trim down the increases for this year. And then the general fund, there were a few changes up and down within the general fund to come to approximately the same place as we were in June. So those add up to your total levy increase of 3.6%.
Dan?
One question was Stray, sorry. Back when we built the Performing Arts Center, we had an EDA levy that was about 440,000, and it's now grown to 617. Could you give me a refresh on the incremental increase each year? Was that a planned incremental increase in the debt service payments?
No.
Or are we putting that money to into other things?
When we had all of the property tax cuts in the 2009, 2010, one of the big changes in the levy was that we moved the economic development activity to the EDA fund. So.
Yep.
So we were able to lower the property tax levy and use EDA fund balance to cover those funds. And the plan at that time was to build that levy, the EDA levy, back up at 25,000 a year to cover operating expenses. So we're just growing that to meet current operating expenses for economic development. So we're not eating into fund balance for that current activity.
Roughly what dollar amount of the 617, or you can use 2016 as an example, funds the department versus funds the debt service?
I would have to look up that number.
Ballpark, it's
Yeah.
not important to be exact.
Yeah, Mary?
Thank you. Wasn't some of this increase due to the fact that there was less money being collected from the landfill?
Yes.
Yes.
So in other words, when that debt was incurred, it was expected that the landfill fees were going to be paying part of that back, and that has changed because we're not getting as much because there's not as much trash. Is that correct?
That is correct. On the expenditure side, so we haven't raised the levy for that, but we have increased the expenditures out of that fund.
Yeah, Jenny?
Councilmember Keeley, members of the council, I would say in a general sense, EDA operations are probably in the neighborhood of 20 to 30% of that amount, and the rest is debt service, without knowing the exact number. But the majority of it goes to debt service.
For the back, right?
Yeah.
And
Heather?
one other follow-up.
Yep.
I remember, thanks for reminding me on the recycling and recession impact on how much garbage is being tipped in our fee deficiency. So is the EDA fund currently picking up the entire difference, or is any of that being shifted into the general fund? That unexpected lower amount of the tipping fees or host fees? Right?
That
Kelly.
is being picked up in the EDA
EDA
fund.
is picking up all of
Yeah.
that, okay.
Nothing, if I understand correctly, nothing is going into the general fund. This is going in, if you're
Well,
talking
no, I'm
about
talking about, the shortfall in the host
yeah.
fees, which fund picked it up, the EDA or the general or both?
Yeah.
And the answer is the EDA is
EDA.
picking up all of the
Yeah.
deficiency and our
Yeah.
expected revenues from the host. Is that correct?
We increased it incrementally, so we didn't take it one for one, but as the plan. The host fees, we do expect to get over time, just not at the same pace as we originally thought, so, because there is a certain capacity of the landfill, so they should come in over time.
Right, the landfill closure got moved further out, so
Yeah.
the payments along the way get smaller.
Smaller.
But over the extended years, they're gonna still total the same. It's just gonna be a lower amount on a per year. So on the expected funds needed to service the PAC debt, we shifted that to the EDA fund.
That's correct.
Okay.
Heather?
If you wanted the exact numbers, 170,000 is operations. The transfer to the game center is 461,000 roughly. I'm just rounding. And then the greater MSP and MCCD were about 33,000. So that totals about $665,000. So
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
There is
Kelly?
there is the tax abatement levy that's levied in the general fund that goes, but that is as
PAC.
planned.
Yeah.
If that's, okay. Oops. Click happy there. This is a little bit more detailed slide about the same total increases. It explains the current service level. So the first section of this table is what are we expecting that the current services will cost next year? So without making changes to service levels, what will we be looking at? Under employee services and health insurance increases, and we have a small tail to our minimum wage increases as well. Those are the first three numbers, so they represent about 2.4% increase in the levy, if you add those three numbers together. Current expenditures, about 200,000 overall, which is, when you consider the number of departments and the breadth of that covering, that is a a fairly low increase for inflationary items. We do ask departments to really hold the line on their current expenditures, and they're looking for ways to, if they have an increase that comes at them inflationary-wise in one area, they're looking at other areas to try to balance that out. So those are the real detailed things that will get coming over the next couple months, but that's the overall plan. And then the transfer to the PAC debt operations of a $40,000 increase, which is really what we were just talking about. That incremental increase to cover that host fee shortfall.
Mhm.
And then the next line is the net increase in non-tax revenues and decrease of use of reserves that offset those increases. So we have those expense increases on the first 5 lines, and then that minus one is what revenues are coming in other than property taxes that will help us pay for those expenditures. And that number is pretty low this year. And that's another number that we really have departments working on. We wait for trends to show up every month. We're looking at, how are we trending in these areas, and where can we look at? They're also looking at their fees and charges. You did that, asked them to do that in great detail last year. So they're still doing that, but probably not any new large fees projected in when we bring the budget forward. But they,
Dan?
Question on, we isolate health insurance, for somewhat obvious reasons. The top line employee services, it's wages and benefits. Would those be all of the benefits outside of health insurance? In other words, retirement, 401k,
Yeah.
what? I guess what
well,
else?
we don't have 401k, but para.
Or para, sorry,
Yeah.
para.
Yeah.
So pension.
Pension. Is that,
So the FICA.
what else is included in the word benefits on that line?
It's really those payroll taxes and some small things for life insurance. There's a small, really internal charge that we make that covers vacation and sick leave funding as people accrue balances and we need to pay those out. It's a small percentage. That's pretty much
Okay.
the main
Safe to
ones
say
in
that
there.
the overwhelming majority of the 608 is wages as health insurance as a benefit is line item separately, and it's a
Yes,
significant number.
right.
And
And we
it's
really pulled
always a
that out.
significant number, and it's always a pressure when we go out for bid also, trying to hold that.
Yeah.
Because the increases are always double digit.
Yes, and actually, I think we've done pretty well.
Yeah.
In fact, we haven't necessarily always seen double-digit increases, and which is good, but it still ends up being a big number.
And that's why we pull it out, is because it
Thank
is
you.
a significant portion of that number. And we pulled out the minimum wage just as that is an unusual mandated
mandate.
item that we have had for the last couple of years. So that's why we pulled that one out. So for current services, then that first subtotal of $863,000, that's really to do what we're currently doing with increased costs. It would have a 2.7% increase in the levy. Then the bottom half of it are your adopted plans, and very similar to the slide that we had previously, with a little bit more detail, I guess. Your Parks Capital Fund, that was another one that really is from way back in 2009, 2010, when the cuts were made to, Parks Capital was one that was cut significantly with a plan to grow back that funding for maintaining the city's park system. And so this is the last year of the large increases, and even along the way as we went back and restored, we did make some lower restorations along the way even than planned. So this is the last of the large restorations, and the fund 5-year plan that you'll find coming up is to fund it at $25,000 a year increase, just to cover the increasing costs and keep that fund
Maintaining.
current without it losing pace. I've combined the equipment, vehicle, facilities, and IT capital funds. These are capital replacement funds, and they're three different funds that are added together, but it's an amount to cover inflationary costs in replacing cities' vehicles, equipment. It's really a large number of assets, large value of assets.
Pardon me,
Dan?
can I inquire again? That's a pretty significant fall off in the Parks Capital Fund. Is it necessary in your mind for us to be at 100 this year and then drop to 25 next year due to the expected investments or expenditures that are already planned, like some of the equipment replacement and whatnot? And with that drop off down to 25, which is pretty significant, do we necessarily have that much drop off in planned expenditures, or are we just basically have built that fund up to where it can then sustain itself regardless of the
We're
rise or
getting,
fall?
their fund balance on their 5-year plans has been pretty low with this 100,000 built in.
So are we kind of getting back above water by getting these
We're
hundreds? and-
trying to get
Yeah.
there. If you
Yeah.
remember the discussions
yeah.
last year.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I know that, if Terry were here, he would get the high five for being the team player through those rough years in accepting a lot of, lower budgets. And that now that things are different, obviously, than they were in 9, 10, and 11, we're trying to rebuild that. I just wonder if the, sort of the,
To even that out a little bit.
well, yeah, are we, what's driving that 100, 100, and then such a dramatic fall off?
We would have to go back to that department and ask them to move some of their projects that they have planned for 2017 out one more year in order to do
To be able
that.
to do any kind of change that.
Right.
Okay, fair enough, thank you.
Did you want to add anything else, Heather?
Exactly what I was gonna say,
Yeah.
is that it's the projects are programmed for this, to include this, and
Yep.
so that they would have to not do things that they had otherwise
Yeah.
planned on doing.
Okay,
And that was in the capital improvement plan that we saw last year. It's how it's being,
it's almost
phased out.
pay-go. I mean,
Yeah.
we're putting it in and
Yeah.
they're basically planning to spend it as quickly
Yeah.
as it's coming back into the fund
Yep.
rather than carrying any kind of
Yeah.
balance. Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry.
yeah, Heather.
Madam Mayor, just a clarification, we are trying to build up to the appropriate fund balance level in that fund as well, so.
Gotcha.
Another challenge for that fund is the lower park development fees. So in the
Yeah,
past.
because we don't have any.
Right.
No development. And even when we go down to the Minnesota River Quadrant, a lot of those parcels have already paid. So there isn't anything new that'll come in. It's only when when a development is new that we have revenue.
Right.
Because once they pay that park dedication fee, it's done. They don't pay, that property doesn't pay it again.
Yeah, so that is a challenge for that fund because that has been I think we had about 150,000 most years in that. It's up and down, but our budget has been 150, and that's would be very difficult to make in the
The
future.
80s and
Sure.
early 90s, it was pretty flush, but not anymore.
So I think then we were to the Infrastructure Trust Fund, which is your 50,000 increase every year. And the EDA operations, 25,000, which we already talked about. And I skipped over the Emerald Ash Borer because it's 0, but that's where we dropped down the 50, would have been 50. And then the Street Revolving Fund, that's our miscellaneous maintenance for things along the side of the road, like paths and right-of-way improvements, barriers, that sort of thing. Miscellaneous small projects, so that's up 13,000. And that totals an increase, a combined increase to the tax levy of $1,149,000 for 3.6.
Okay.
The new tax base support, when we gave you this number in June, we had a lower estimate, and that was been corrected from the county, so that's awesome. So we have a little bit more in generated in new construction, so, so if you applied the tax rate to just those that value generated by new construction, that would be an additional $120,000 approximately. So that leaves the existing tax base to come up with the balance, or $1,029,000. This is a very preliminary estimate on what this looks like for an average residential home. We do this every year, and it's an estimate. There is no average home. There's no, this is not a particular home. The county gives us a median home, the average home value, median home value within our city, and that's $222,000. That's about a 3.4% growth in value from last year. So we compare what would the median value home last year at last year's median value pay and tax rate versus this year's median home value. And that would represent about a $37 increase annually in the taxes for that valued home at a 3.6% levy increase, or $3 a month. Commercial property has been very flat. I mean, it is, we haven't had growth valuation-wise in the existing properties. We've always picked for quite a number of years, at least 10 or 15 years, we picked this hypothetical $1 million commercial property because there's no median value in those properties, but we have this hypothetical $1 million commercial property. We show no growth. That particular property would actually have a $7 per year decrease with this tax levy increase. So there is a shift from commercial to residential because the residentials have been increasing in value while commercial properties have stayed flat. So when you divide the pie up, there's a little bit more on the residential side than there is on the commercial side. I think that you're aware of the SAFER grant. Okay.
We authorized it.
So the fire department has requested, applied for a grant that would provide 4 firefighters. The grant would be over a 2-year period of time for about $800,000. We have not built, well, I guess we have built into the projections because the balance of it, we would be projecting that it's covered by fund balance for our capital startup costs and by additional EMS revenues. So we expect that having an additional 4 firefighters and 1 more ambulance would have additional EMS runs. Currently, many runs are turned over to mutual aid, so a different ambulance service is providing those services, so there would be additional capacity to have additional runs. We think this is a very conservative estimate, but it's one of those estimates it's really hard to estimate how many additional runs we would actually have or how much that would generate. So we have an estimate of $350 to $440 over the next 5 years annually. We would estimate that there would be some startup costs, most of which is an ambulance of about $200,000. But other costs would be training and equipment for the ambulance and all that sort of thing. So with the grant paying for the firefighters for the first 2 years, and our additional EMS revenues, over the first 2 years, we could cover about half of the startup costs. So we would be projecting to use fund balance the first year of about $200,000, and then have a payback actually the next year of about $100,000 from increased revenues to pay back part of the of the startup costs. And then in years 3 through 5, when the grant ends, property tax increases would be approximately $300,000 annually to fund this same level of service when the grant ends.
Okay, Bill?
I just want the public to know that you're just providing that information to us. We have not voted on that or agreed that we're going to go forward. All we've done is agreed that you could apply for the grant if we get the funds, and then we'll look at it, so I just want to make that clear to the public. We have not voted that we would go forward if, number one, we didn't get the grant, number two, that we would go beyond that anyway, that we're going to look at it. So that's my recollection.
Good point.
And that is how we treat it on top of, that's why we show these things that with those existing services, and then if we add on something, a new service like this, we treat it as on top of.
But at least the public knows that there is a plan in place and how we're going to be addressing all of that when we make those decisions. Yeah.
While
Dan.
we're on it, we may as well maybe allow maybe just give a forecasted timeline of when, you might think some of these things, like the grant, is there an expected answer period when we would know if we get the grant, and then
Yeah.
if we decided to go forward?
Heather, because we already approved that the fire,
To apply for the grant.
to apply for the grant.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Keeley, as the mayor said, the approval for the application has been done. The first round of awards have happened, and we are eagerly awaiting the second. I think there are 2 more rounds. But as of, I think I talked with our fire chief this morning around 10 a.m., and I haven't heard from him since then. So in terms of whether or not we've gotten anything, I think he'll text me when it comes in, but we haven't heard anything yet. And the feds are notoriously slow on awarding these grants, so, but we do expect it would be before the end of
The month.
this year, before the end of September, for sure.
And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that we do have to, if once it is awarded, we have to act very quickly
Yep.
because it is a 2017, 2018,
Yep.
very defined time frame.
That's correct.
So it would actually be a budget 2017 year decision. If the grant were to be approved in the next
Yeah.
6 weeks, we're going to be faced with that decision that
Yeah.
Bill alluded to, that we haven't made yet, it's going to be on our plate for 2017.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. We also give you some projections for the out years, so because everything that you do is within a 5-year time scope, so you're not making just this year's decision, you're making it within the next 5 years, or to see what it would do to the next 5 years. Some of the things that are driving costs for the additional 5 years, which I have a chart coming up here, the costs of many of our services are fully tax-supported services, like police and fire, parks operations, street maintenance. So changes in revenues, other revenues other than property tax, don't cover necessarily those particular costs. Healthcare costs, as we talked earlier, continue to increase. And the out years, we have the continued increase in funding for the Emerald Ash Borer, so those, we'll see that continued in the out years. The SAFER grant we have put into years 3 and 5, just so that you can see what that would look like. Annual support for Parks Capital of $25,000, and some of these other same ones we've talked about, the street maintenance, the capital improvements, capital replacement plans, and then the debt structured increase for 2020 for the Heart of the City decertification. So when the Heart of the City decertifies, there will be tax base coming back, and the plan when the bonds were issued for the Performing Arts Center was that there was a increase in the debt structure payments at that time that would be offset by additional tax increase or tax base coming back. If I realize that's a bit of a complicated mouthful, but
Yeah. Just going to be back on the tax rolls.
should be a larger pie to divide up.
Yeah.
So here are the updated projections. So 2017, we came down 1%. 2018, I think, is about the same as where we were. And I should clarify, the purple was when we did the
Projections.
2015 budget process, what were we expecting? And where are we, the orange with these projections? So when we get to 2019, that is the that is the $300,000, if we do get the SAFER grant and it comes back onto the tax rolls, there would be an increase required in 2019. In 2020, that is the heart of the city and the Performing Arts Center debt structure change. We did not show that in the 2015 on this particular chart, but it was there. We did talk about it, but this particular chart wasn't there. So, and then 2021, we hadn't projected that last year because that's the new year in your 5-year horizon.
Okay.
Use of fund balance that we have built in so far would be the couple of normal ones, which would be the reserved landfill abatement. That's how you're funding your recycling program, sustainability program. Those funds are set aside and can only be used for that sort of activity. And so that is a use of those. Ice Center debt service, this is your 10-year plan to use some general fund balance to buy down the debt service that would otherwise be a tax levy. That's the same number as the past and the same as your plan. Comprehensive plan update is the second year. It was a 2-year process. The expenses and are estimated at $200,000. Jenny and her department will be actually refining that, but they exactly offset the expenses at this point in time, so that may come to a different number, but it will actually not affect the tax, property tax.
Bill?
I'd like you to go back to the slide that you mentioned about 2020 and 2021. Would you say again about the increased cost to the Performing Arts Center?
When we did this chart in June, we had not factored in that on the chart, so I was comparing to the chart that we showed you
Right, and what
before.
difference does that make from the chart before? You showed in
we-
June.
The one that we showed in June should have had that built in on the purple.
Oh, so the 3.2 in 2020 was not a 3.2 in the June presentation? Was it different than that?
I guess what I'm asking is what
We
the
made a
increase
mistake.
is. What is that increase in the increase in payment?
The increase in payment,
Heather?
Madam Mayor,
That is the
Councilmember Copeland,
change in
that's
the
the increase
debt-
in the debt service
in the
payment.
debt
It's about
service.
$800,000, is that correct?
it is about
About
that.
$800,000. And you'll see that actually when Ms. Dry gets into the debt service stuff, so you'll see that.
And that'll go to the general fund, is that correct?
It'll be a debt
Part of the
service,
tax levy, yeah.
right, it's a debt service payment.
And is
So
it,
it's-
is
It is
it,
a tax levy, correct?
Dan?
is it all covered, or how much of that is covered by the decertification of that?
It is
that you brought?
more than covered by the
It'd be more, yeah.
decertification.
More
Yeah.
than covered.
So
it's-
you will
the
still
800
have-
It's fully absorbed by the decertified
Yeah.
tax
Yes.
district and,
It's the money that the tax base now is
sure.
restored and bigger, and that's how that is.
That tax base is currently in
Yeah.
the heart of the city TIF district.
Okay,
Yeah,
So when it comes out of the heart of the city TIF district, it
Okay.
would generate similar, we did TIF 1 and TIF 2
Yeah.
that way. And on that slide where we had the new construction, you would actually have a line that those properties would generate this amount of
Additional.
tax revenue, so the average home or the average won't absorb that. So your levy is going to look like it is an anomaly on the percentage, the grand total percentage increase, but the effect to the taxpayers, the existing taxpayers will be
Be a lot smaller.
less.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
is gross
Yeah, small.
tax
Yeah.
levy, which includes that incremental increase from the decertified
Yeah.
district, right?
Mary?
Kind of a fooling
I
tab.
think we had the same situation when the TIF districts,
District
1 and 2 were decertified.
Yep.
It soared, it looked, I mean, it was a paper
Yeah.
thing, it really didn't affect the taxpayer.
No.
Correct?
And yes,
Yeah.
that's true. It actually has been in the 5-year plans.
Yeah.
It just wasn't on this chart, and we apologize for the chart being incorrect, but it was in the 5-year plans. It's, when we did TIF 1 and 2, that was how you funded the infrastructure
That's
trust fund. So the increase went to the infrastructure trust
Yeah.
fund. In this case, it,
Goes to the Performing Arts Center.
yes.
What people, it's, the money in those tax increment financing district goes into a fund. Then when it gets decertified, it goes into the general, because it's now back in the,
Yes.
yeah.
The problem is it's expressed as
Yeah.
a levy increase when in
Yeah.
fact it's not.
It's not.
It really
It's
isn't.
been
It
there.
could be a levy
It's always
savings,
been
but
there.
the way we report it, it makes it look like that's a
Yeah.
levy increase, because you're looking at the same, like in 2020,
Yeah.
you're looking at 4.6. And you look at that, and you look at the 4.2 or the 3.4, and you're assuming that they're all tax increases, when in fact
But it's-
4.6 has a large section in
Yeah.
it that's revenue.
I'll go to Bill, Heather, and Mary.
So is it fair to say that your net effect of 2019, 2020 in the purple is still a reasonable estimate on a net effect?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Mary.
That's fine.
Okay, Heather.
Just so the council does have to act to recapture that.
Sure.
And so that's why we present
Yeah.
it that way. As you've heard in the June presentation, there are many factors
Yeah.
that go into determining what the actual tax rate is, and so that's one of them.
It just moves into the general fund. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so I think we were here. There was some election equipment that we had a plan to spend over a couple of years, so this is the, this 30,000 payment on that election equipment. With elections, that's a consistent handling that we've done with that, because it is a fluctuating every other year kind of thing, rather than increasing the levy and then decreasing the levy and then increasing the levy every other year. We take that from available fund balance to keep the levy level.
Yep, Dan.
Would it be safe to say a year from now, we'd be looking at use of fund balance that would only have reserve landfill abatement and ICE center debt? Comp plan would be done, election would be done, the SAFER grant, startup costs we wouldn't go through that again, so we'd be looking at 281 really as a base, and then there's probably some other options that we'd be looking at adding to that like we did this time, but those are the two that are going to remain year after year.
The next year would be 2018, that is actually an election year, so we would have the normal election expenses. So
sorry.
that
Yeah.
would be like
Okay.
about
It's gubernatorial.
160,000 is what we project on that.
310, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, those three.
Yeah.
But
And,
comp
and
update
the
would be
SAFER,
out.
the way we're looking at it, and those are very preliminary numbers, but the way we're looking at SAFER, that you would actually have a negative 100,000, so
Sure,
100,000
credit.
coming
Yeah.
back in.
Year two,
Yeah.
right?
We are still holding this one out as something that we would, if we come up with some one-time expenses that come through the budget process, that this would be something to be considered. Whether that's an appropriate or something we would bring to you, whether you want to do it that way or using property tax.
Dan?
What, that's 710, and, we don't have to make a decision to now, but what was the available funds in that fund balance that we could use for one-time expenses?
There you go.
Oh, next slide.
There you go.
The
Okay,
next
boom.
slide, in a pretty chart. 2015 are actual, that's the actual ending of 2015 fund balance. When we did the 2016 budget, we projected to use some fund balance, so that is why the 2016 column looks shorter. That's because we've used that. And then the 2017 would be a little bit shorter as well, because we're projecting to use some. The contingency is the green. Let me, I think my next slide, nope, I take that back. The red is that restricted landfill, so you can only use that for certain purposes, so the very bottom. The large orange portion is your 35% of next year's budget. So because we have a cash flow that mostly comes in June and December, we have to have enough cash flow to make it to June. And because we spend on a sort of regular basis. So that 35% of the fund balance is represented there. And then the purple is the amount that you've set aside to go towards those specific things in the budget, and then also the future ice center debt. So the use of fund balance in the 2016 budget, and plus the future years of the ice center that have been committed to. You can change that commitment, but it is what you've committed to at this point in time. And so then the contingency is the green on the top, that's the available fund balance. And you have had a goal of that being about $2 million. Those are for your unforeseen things that happen.
Emergencies.
So, and that 2 million has been a number for quite a number of
Yeah.
years, so there's not been an
Since-
inflationary in that number, but, so you're pretty close to that target.
Since 1998 or 97, when we had the
May
straight
98.
rooms?
I'll never forget
98,
that.
Yeah, 98,
That was a bad storm.
yeah. Dan,
So the purple 1.4, that's 1.4 million, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And the slide before was about 7 and some change planned
Yeah.
for 2017. What's the difference?
The ice center future years, so the debt that you've committed for the future years.
Yeah, well, it's 1.4 static in 2017, right? Is what we're setting aside, and the ice center is 140,000? Is
But
that
the,
1.4 million or 140,000?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, which year we're in that ice center. That 140 is the annual amount.
Yes.
The balance that's remaining on the final years, the years,
Oh, is that represented in the purple?
That's represented
You
in
take
there.
the entire future year's plan
Yes.
and lump it in the next coming year, so it's been set aside, right?
Right.
Okay. It's a little deceiving because each year is 1.6, 1.7, 1.3, and it looks like it's more just that year's expenditures rather than that year's plus any future commitments that we made. Okay.
the amount each year that you've set aside and used for fund balance fluctuates, so, the amount committed to the ice center is
Sure.
dropping
Yeah,
as you
that
pay
gets a
off
little bit-
140
yes.
each
Okay, that
year.
makes sense, then, thank you.
Looking at some of your plans, Infrastructure Trust Fund, you've given us the direction to stay the course on that 50,000 increase each year. We are at the goal that it was to be PAYGO in the street, the city portion of the street, so no new debt is proposed for the ITF fund.
Did we
Dan?
just hit that, or did we hit it a year
No,
ago? or
it's
two
been
years
a-
ago?
It's been a number of
Yeah,
years.
we've been doing that
we've
for a
been in
number of years.
Back in PAYGO mode, okay.
Yeah, we've been doing that for a number of years.
Yep.
Thank you.
We've already talked about the Parks Capital funding, and the capital replacement funds as well. We did lower the planned increase in this projection for the fact that you implemented franchise fees. So we had planned that we would need to build the facilities fund up a little incrementally over the next few years. And now that the franchise fees are in that fund, we have reduced the amount from the general fund to the facilities fund to cover that. The facilities fund is the more complicated one this year. For the 2016 budget, there was an estimated issuance of 7.7 million for debt for phase one of the facilities. We had projected that in 2017, that would require debt service of about 840,000. So we had split the increase over the 2 years, so we had a planned increase in 2016 of 420,000, and then another planned increase for 2017 of 420 to fund that first year of debt service. And then the remaining years after that were more of an average of 960, but we have some reduced debt levy because of other debt rolling off, so that other piece of it could be absorbed. So we were going for level debt service with this issuance over a 2-year period of time. And then the other, we took a phased approach to the other facilities plan items, the big things that were coming up, that those would then be debt issuance as well, but in future years as this debt rolls off. Because you have implemented the franchise fees, we're looking at it differently this year, property tax wise. We have had an annual general fund transfer of about 402,000, so that would stay in the facilities fund. We have the property tax levy of 420, which is what you increased last year. And then the franchise fees, very conservative estimate. We've had one billing cycle that has come out, but we don't have any totals from what is coming back. So that's a conservative estimate on what those franchise fees will generate annually. So
Yeah.
keeping,
Dan?
When will we actually have a firm number, do you think, realistically?
they are paying us quarterly. We probably can get some estimates from them, them being the utility companies.
I mean, they really do, we just need 1 month, basically, of billing cycles to kind of project a year.
Yeah,
So
they,
it's not gonna vary that dramatically, I would assume.
and they were to implement during July, so at whatever their various billing cycles are,
Sure.
they have, multiple billing cycles, and, so we let them do it at their, so everybody has something in July.
Sure.
So
So-
I would guess we would be able to get from them fairly decent numbers sometime the end of this month.
Great. So very soon, we'll have some solid numbers to work with this year.
I
Great.
would think so.
September.
What? September.
September, right.
So the expenditures then in that fund would be the debt service. So going forward, as we're looking at the revenue sources to this fund, the debt service for phase one, looking at about 960. And again, these are preliminary numbers. They would vary based on the project costs, and they would vary based on the interest at the time. We would have bonding expenses and that sort of thing that all come into play. So this is where we're at, 960. And then that leaves PAYGO average of about 462, or where we've been in our plans anyway, that 462 in that fund. So the deferred maintenance on the buildings that are in the facility study, plus regular replacements for all other buildings and other capital items, because there's more than just those buildings that were in the facility study for maintenance, regular and replacement. So we're looking for direction based on that. As we have pointed out many times, we were at 3.7, we're now at 3.6. The adopted plans is the council, I guess our question for the council is, are you comfortable with the adopted plans?
Bill?
I just would ask you to make clarification for the public. Had we not done the franchise fee approach to dealing with phase one, what difference would that have made in the tax levy, if you will, to the property owners? Could you give an estimate?
So we would have levied the 420. In this case, we will also, and then we would have had to use the debt the next year for another 125,000. We will use, we are reducing the levy in the general fund that's used to transfer over to the facilities fund for the deferred maintenance. So there are those three things coming together. We'll also use what we can have collected this year in 2016 as part of the reduction in capital costs that will need to be bonded. So those are available to be pay-go when we do bond. That's it.
Heather?
Madam Mayor, I believe it's about 1.4%, is that what you're looking for?
Thank you.
Okay. Council, it's, staff is looking for direction for the maximum tax levy, and as Kelly spoke to at the beginning of her presentation, and it's something that we do every year, this is the max tax, and we cannot go above it, we can go below it, but we need to certify this with the county in September, and that's at our next September meeting, which is the first meeting of the month. And so staff is looking for direction to direct them to stay with the 3.6 to move forward. Mary?
Well, first of all, I want to thank staff for your work. I know you start working out this probably the day after we vote on the levy, and it shows. You do a lot of thoughtful and very creative work in this to cover all the needs of the city. And I think you do a very fine job in that. I am comfortable with the 3.7 only in the sense that I also,
3.6.
or 3.6, because I know just as you shaved it 0.1 already, I'm hoping that you can shave it even a little more. I think that you've been able to do that every year, and I know that your staff is very creative about looking for new ways and efficient ways to do that. So I would say I could live with 3.6.
Bill?
I essentially agree with what Mary said. Again, it's a difficult thing every year to have to vote for any property tax increase. I wish there was more ways that I could myself find to deal with the 2.7 employee costs, et cetera, that we observed. But there's a certain reality that we're in, and given that reality, I'm okay.
Suzanne?
I agree with both Bill and Mary, what they said, and thank you for coming back with even a lower number. We always appreciate that, and as Mary said, hopefully you may be able to fine tune it even a little more, but I would be comfortable with the 3.6 at this point, given all of the constraints that you've presented this evening of what we need to deal with, so.
Dan?
Well, I made my expectations clear at our last budget meeting, but as presented, I don't have a problem with it. I kind of thinking through some of the numbers. I think it's important for us to get a solid number from the franchise
Franchise fees.
revenue, and I'm hoping that is a little higher. My ideal scenario is existing taxpayers, instead of 3.2, would be more like 2.5, and that would require about a $180,000 roughly reduction in our core budget. So, but as presented, we're not voting on this tax right now. We're just basically saying we can't go over this, and I don't have a problem with it as is.
I want to thank you, staff, for all of the work, because it is difficult, and every year it is difficult. But the thing is, we have a service to provide to our citizens, and we run a very lean ship. And we all saw that the highest part of all of this is people. And we need people to provide the services to our community, whether it's to keep it safe, to make sure that we have people to clear the roads, we have people to make sure that we're working with developers and our residents and businesses so that the quality of our product and our residents continue to improve. So we're in a service business. It's all about people. So I'm okay with the 3.6. We continue to do the work that we need to do, and that's good. And staff, 3.6 for max tax.
Thank you, Madam.
We have a few slides, a lot of slides, but I will try to go through them very quickly.
Yeah.
On
He
the,
has to leave in 9:30, and we have another. So I'm watching.
I
Yes,
would-
Mary?
I would like
Yeah,
to see that,
Yeah,
yeah.
this is good.
okay. All right.
Okay.
So a lot of questions, and we've had a lot of things that are going to be bonded and debt issuance, so we wanted to bring back to you a presentation that we did a few years ago.
Yeah.
We've just updated it, just to talk about long-term debt as you're making these decisions going forward. So we'll talk briefly about some general information on municipal debt, our debt policies here at the City of Burnsville, and then future debt plans, and then just rating information and things that they cover, the rating agencies. Minnesota regulates the kinds of debt that we can issue, and limits on debt. We are well below those limits. And then there are also IRS regulations on taxable versus non-taxable, and all kinds of regulations that we have to live within. Burnsville also has a debt policy, so in your budget document, you have your council financial plan policies, and you have a more restrictive debt limit, and repayment terms are more restrictive than even those policies, so we are living within those. And we also don't use long-term debt to fund operations. I think that's a very key thing. We're matching it to the life of the asset that we're funding. We often talk about PAYGO. So what is PAYGO? That is being able to fund capital items or long-term items from current property taxes so that you don't have to issue debt. And we try to do that with our shorter assets, our equipment, annual improvement project. Your infrastructure trust fund is helping you fund the city's portion, because every year we have, it might be a long-term asset, but we have a street improvement project every year. So we are paying PAYGO on that street improvement project rather than incurring interest costs for those types of issues. And then facility maintenance for the regular kinds of replacements, we're PAYGO on those things.
Yeah, Dan?
Question on debt service. If we were to choose to put some debt to do some infrastructure, what are we borrowing at today with our AAA bond rating?
It depends on the market at the time. It depends on
Range.
the length and
The
the
last
actual
one.
issue. Like a lease revenue bond is gonna be more expensive than a general obligation. Actually, that points to this slide. The things we have GO backing on, which means that if the revenue associated doesn't come in, we pledge property tax to it, so the full faith and credit of the city. So we have had around 2% on some things. You know, we refinanced the Performing Arts Center bonds recently. We did them in 2 segments and saved a lot of money by having a lower interest rate.
Right.
So.
Thank you.
Another reason we issue debt would be special assessment. So on those road projects, there's a piece of it that is paid for by the people that live along the roads, the assessments. We give them time to pay, so we need to finance that portion of the project because the revenues are coming in over time, or if there's some private funding that comes in over time. So on our geo improvement bonds, it just shows you the existing bonds that are out there, that most of them are funded by special assessment revenue
Yeah.
coming in. That's your green column. There's some debt service levy. Those are the older ones. And in 2010, we actually used some of the ITF levy for one bond issue as well. I'll skip over a few of them. Future debt plans. So in 2016, we had in the budget assessments that would be bonded for 1.6, and we've been bonding water and sewer portion because the water and sewer fund is at a part in its life right now that a lot of having a lot of major capital expenditures. So we are taking out the peaks and valleys of mostly the peaks of the water and sewer capital improvements. A lot of the streets that are being currently reconstructed are requiring a lot of water and sewer replacement at that time, and it makes sense to do those pipes at the same time as the street is being done. So, and then we had the meter replacement, and that one is being funded through a
Facilities.
public facilities loan. And that one, the interest rate on that was 1.25%, so over 10 years. And then we had the plan for facilities phase 1 in there as well. So that was 2027, or I guess that was 2016. In 2017, we had assessments in water and sewer, meter replacement plan, and then the facilities 1. Facilities plan is covering 2 years. That's
Mary?
You have 2017 twice. Do you mean 2018?
I do mean 2018.
Thank you.
Thank you for pointing that out. I copied and pasted without.
fine. I just want to be sure.
Yes,
We're
you're
playing
right.
that again? No, thank you.
We're going to do that twice. So we have some assessments in water and sewer. 2017 is a big bonding year for us, mostly because of those meter replacements and the facilities plan. We also have to live within bank qualification. You've probably heard of that. We can get cheaper rates if we issue less than $10 million
Yeah.
in any 1 year. So that is the reason why we have timed the facilities phase 1, even though we're starting the facilities in 2016. We're timing, we'll probably issue in January or February those bonds right after year end. Because in 2016, you refunded the Performing Arts Center too, which took a big chunk of our bank qualification limits. So we're trying to maximize what we can get in under bank qualification. If we have 1 year that we really hit it, and then back to the $10 million in the following year. Some of the things why we're issuing debt, that facility construction, surface water treatment plant in the past. So these are some past things and some present. So surface water treatment plant, the maintenance facility, there was an addition to that. We had that, the ice center renovation we talked about earlier, the Ames Center, and now the facilities plan. So these are long-term assets that have a long life, and the reason you would bond for those instead of saving up money, if you're saving up money, you are charging today's taxpayers for a benefit they would be not necessarily getting if they're not here in the future. If you have a big facility like this and you're bonding for it and paying for it over the time, the people that are using that facility are paying for it in their property taxes. Same with our large CIP projects, so the 5 and 13 interchange, County Road 42, when we had that improvement, those were big peaks in the CIP that we bonded for. And then the utility replacements that I was just talking about are in the streets. And then sometimes there's a desire to accelerate an improvement project by doing the meter replacements all at the same time. We're on one system. We're just getting the benefit of getting the revenue from lost water, because if the meters stop registering all of the water going through, if we put in new meters, we're making sure everybody's getting charged for the water that's being used. In capital equipment, you might in the future choose to like a fire truck, a big capital improvement, that would be something you could issue equipment certificates for. And it's not something that we've done, but it is something that we could do. Or not done recently, I should say. Refunding, that's when we take existing debt and we can issue new debt that we use the principal to pay off, or the proceeds rather, to pay off the existing debt that has a higher interest rate. And so whenever we issue bonds, we put in a call date, so somewhere in the middle of the bond issue, and at that call date, we can actually pay down the bonds with new issues. And because they're shorter term and current market, we can usually save a lot of money on future interest there. These are historical debt balances, so you can see in 2016, and the 2016 does actually include the new facilities phase 1 and the, because it is happening right after year end. So we do have a bigger balance in 2016, mainly, as I said, due to the meter replacements and the facilities plan. This is just another version of what this says 2012, but it is 2016. Some of these are pretty detailed, and I think I'll just skip over those. We do have some TIF bonds, so those are ones that are paid with TIF revenues. And in the utilities, again, just talking about some of the things that we've paid for in utility funds. Stormwater is one where we've had enough revenues in the stormwater to meet the needs, the capital improvement needs, so we've been really very pay-go on the stormwater, so you're seeing your debt and annual payments go down in that fund. And we've talked about a lot of those, so another reason to bond would be rate stabilization in the utility fund, so you don't have the peaks in jumps in rates. So we have been going up in the debt and annual payments in the water and sewer fund.
Well, we've had a lot of replacement in infrastructure for water.
Yep. The lease revenue bonds, those were the ice center renovations that we did to the ice plant that were needed. And this is the one where you're using some of your fund balance to pay some of the debt service there. There is also a general debt service levy for that. It doesn't pay for the whole amount for the ice center. Ames, we've also covered this several slides back of the different things that are revenue sources that are going to pay that debt service. And we also have talked about this one. Bond rating. So the city of Burnsville does have the highest possible bond rating. We've had 2 rating agencies over the last few years. We are currently with Standard & Poor's, so when we issue current debt, we have Standard & Poor's do our rating. We pay them to do that rating. Moody's, we had used in the past, and they do what's called a surveillance rating on our existing debt. So the debt that they originally rated, they still will issue, it's been about annual, maybe biannual ratings on that existing debt. It's a much less extensive review that they do, but
Because we don't pay them.
Right. We don't have to pay for that.
We don't pay
That is
them.
good.
We pay Standard & Poor's.
So what can you do to maintain that AAA rating? It's, what you've done already is improving property values in the local economy. So the things that you do, property maintenance program, the streets, investing in streets and infrastructure and development activities. Some things that are outside of your control are the wealth indices. They do rate us on those kinds of things of our population.
The per capita
and the broader
income.
economy outside of just Burnsville and even Minnesota. Those things have impacts on property values. S&P has these factors, both Moody's and S&P rate differently, but S&P rates on these things that are weighted by those percentages. And on the right side, I've listed what they rate, how they rated Burnsville in that, on each of those things. So the things that you can control are strong and very strong, and the least, or we're still adequate with the 3 rating on debt and contingent liabilities. That just means that we are, with the debt level that we have, we're in the adequate category.
Yeah. Mary?
Going back to what you said about what we can control and can't control, debt and contingent liabilities, which is number 3, adequate. We can control that, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
And when you talk about the debt and the contingent liability, when I read their letter, the debt is okay. It's the contingent liability, and that has to do with the pension, correct?
There's a factor of that. I think the Moody's rating actually hit that one a little bit
Yeah.
harder. This, for Standard & Poor's, they have a different way of valuing that, so it's really comparing where we are debt-wise compared to other cities in that AAA rating.
Yeah, but when you have debt and then they have contingent liabilities, they really explain that the debt, because our debt is 62 million, and in comparison to other cities, but it's the contingent liability which we have no control over because that's controlled by the state.
That is true on the pension side of it. We are
Yeah.
doing exactly as we're required by the state, and
In terms of paying that debt.
that's true.
But,
Yeah.
Madam Mayor, we do have higher debt loads than comparable cities, and I think that's one of the things that, Standard & Poor's looks at more than Moody's. Moody's hits the pension liabilities pretty hard, as Ms. Dryas just said, so. But we're able to offset that with things like the budgetary flexibility because we have a high fund balance and we
Yeah.
have all of those other
Yeah.
things.
Because when I read their report to us on all of the things that we have control over, we're strong and very strong on. And so when we also can, and they see the full faith and credit of the city on our payment, they see that as very strong. Dan?
Well, and I also have always looked at this weighting system that they use, and 10% on debt and contingency is not a very big load. Management carries twice
Yeah.
the impact, twice the weighting, I guess. The
Yeah.
economy 3 times that,
Yeah.
but we don't exactly have much control over that.
Yeah.
And we saw an improvement in our rating or maintaining through the economy. So even though that weight of that 30% economy during 09, 10, 11 was really heavy and it was negative, we overcame that by a strong management, budgetary flexibility, budgetary performance, all those things that we can control, that significant cut in our
Yeah.
budget at a
And the
time when-
liquidity.
Yes, helped to maintain. Could you clarify that?
Yeah.
The only thing I would clarify is that S&P fundamentally changed the way that they rated cities at that point in time, and so a lot of cities that were of a similar nature of Burnsville did see an increase in their ratings, and so there was a fundamental change in that process, so.
Okay.
So you're saying we were just as good as everybody else, but we really weren't any better or worse?
Councilmember Keely, I think we're better than everyone else in all of these factors, but I just want to make sure that the information is provided.
Yeah. I remember when we went through that and the conversations, and there were a lot of cities
Yeah.
that were getting their rating
Yeah.
chopped.
But we
in the
but
recession,
we
and
held it through the
we held it,
recession.
Right, because we made our
Yeah.
decisions in cutting the budget.
Okay.
This is just a chart that shows where one of the things they look at very strongly is the market value, taxable market value, and we're on the upswing. This chart is not unusual to any other city to have that dip during the recession. But we are moving back upward, so that's great.
Yeah, close to 6 billion.
So, there's a few charts here that I left in here. These are actually comparisons from the last time that we did this. They take a lot of work to update, but I think they're pretty much the same. It shows you Similar cities are comparable cities, that most of our comparable cities are AAA rated. The green ones are AAA, the other ones are AA. So, all very highly rated, so it is expected, that we should be in this category. And as you can see, we're a little on the low end on indicated market value, compared to some of the other cities that are AAA. On the direct debt, Burnsville is in the middle or towards the middle on direct debt. General fund reserves, we score very highly in this area. That's that budgetary flexibility, and that is, that they rate, so we're on the good side of this chart. And then, general fund reserves, as a percent of expenditures, we're, in the middle on that one as well. I mentioned before on the state measures, in the Burnsville policy, we're well within our policies for, debt, but those are really high. We would, that would be really high if we had, if we were at the
Agree or
limits,
two.
if we were at the limits, that would not be good. And that is the end of that presentation.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Kelly before she departs? Thanks, Kelly. Okay, the next item is the Facilities Improvement Project, Phase 1, schematic design review. And presenting is,
Take a quick break.
okay, I guess we're going to take a quick break,
Sorry.
and then we'll be back in 5 minutes. Okay,
I think this will be a while.
so everybody needs to. And Dana Hardy, our Director of Administrative Services, and John McNamara from Wold Architect and Engineering. Garrett.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and council members. Tonight we'll be providing you with an update on the progress we've made since April on the Phase 1 Facility Improvement Plan. The update this evening will be shared to you in 3 stages. I'll start the evening off by leading us through a review of the project history, the scope, and the council direction to date. John McNamara of Wold Architect and Engineers is here this evening, and he'll present solutions we've identified as a result of our planning process. And then Dana Hardy will wrap things up as she covers the budget, possible funding sources, and new discoveries that we believe staff should, or council should be aware of that exist outside the original study that was done in 2014. At the conclusion of the presentation, staff will entertain questions and hear feedback regarding next steps. Ends and outcomes set the foundation for council policy, and for tonight's agenda, it relates to our ends based on the financial management, which is people find City of Burnsville is managed in a cost-effective, responsible manner, maintaining the highest standards of service to enhance the community's quality of life for a reasonable investment in our city services. Burnsville is an organization that provides a supportive and collaborative environment, encouraging employee learning and participation in the decision-making process. Based on previous direction from council in April, the scope of the Phase 1 project immediately impacts 4 of our facilities. City Hall and the Police Department were constructed in 1988 and have not had any significant renovations for nearly 30 years. Fire Station 1 was originally built as a police station. It was transformed into a fire station in 1989 and had the apparatus bay added to it in 2011. It's important to note that in 2014, Wold determined that this building had reached its end of life, and any significant investment in the building is not recommended at this time. The city garage was constructed as a maintenance facility in 1969 and is currently home of the garage music venue and educational facility. The Burnsville Hockey Club has its training facility inside that space. Portions of the Burnsville Athletic Club are over there, and it also serves the operational needs of numerous city departments. This next slide takes a look at the question, why are we doing this planning? Staff has heard in the past that council believes it's important that we take care of what we have. To assist with that direction, staff contracted with Wold Architects and Engineers to help the city identify our most immediate needs and to anticipate our needs through 2030 as it relates to 5 facilities. During both the 2014 Needs Assessment Project and the work that's been accomplished since April of 2016, Wold has been tasked with the challenge of identifying flexible solutions that encourage efficiency, staff interaction, create collaborative workspaces, and maximize our use of existing space while minimizing our need for any type of building expansion. In addition to the basic challenges that come along with managing aging facilities, it was important that Wold work closely with staff to understand how we've changed the way we've provided services, how external policies have impacted our service requirements to the community, and how our business culture and collaboration have changed over the last 30 years. In 2014, Wold worked closely with staff to produce the space needs assessment for 5 of our city facilities. This document is serving as a high-level facility roadmap that has recommended 3 stages of facility improvements. Our Phase 1 identified the city's most immediate needs, and the recommendation was that those needs be solved in the first 1 to 5 years. Phase 2 anticipated the needs that the city would have in the next 5 to 10 years, and then Phase 3 identified expected needs for these 5 facilities serving a fully built community in the next 10 to 15 years. The needs assessment discussed in April of 2015 identified approximately $23 million in facility improvements that would need to take place over the next 15 to 20 years. These improvements, if completed, would maximize our operational efficiency and allow us to take care of what we have for those 5 facilities. In December 2015, Council directed staff to move forward with the Phase 1 planning process and address the most immediate needs of our facilities. City Hall and Police were identified, along with the master plan replacement for Fire Station 1. And we were asked to design and plan for deferred maintenance needs related to the city garage. In the January 2016 all-day work session, council further refined the direction to include a conceptual design and cost estimating related to a police-covered vehicle storage. A contract was awarded to Wold Architect and Engineers in April of 2016. They have worked very closely with staff in every impacted department to provide solutions to our needs that we'll see later tonight. So tonight we'll review schematic design development for a portion of the Phase 1 project. I emphasize a portion because it's important to note that not all of our planning for Phase 1 is complete at this time. Instead, Wold and staff have elected to focus our time and energy on the portions of the scope that are most likely to be impacted by any decisions to move forward with construction in the near future. We anticipate that we will be returning to council at the October 11th meeting for a complete review of the Phase 1 design development. If council were to authorize this project to proceed, we would anticipate that we could begin construction to Phase 1 in mid-year of 2017, and then it would last approximately 12 to 18 months. The solutions we're sharing tonight have truly been an exercise in employee engagement. From April's direction, we started out by expanding the original core planning team to include additional knowledge and experience in areas of police, finance, and public works. These additions included Police Chief Eric Gieske, Police Sergeant Matt Smith, Finance Director Kelly Stry, and Assistant Public Works Director Jeff Raddick. From there, the core team toured relevant facilities to see firsthand how other cities are handling similar needs that we're experiencing. And over the last 5 months, Wold has led numerous meetings with the core planning team, with members of subcommittees of the police department and city hall, and they've helped us to develop the solutions to the needs that we'll see later. In addition, we've also hosted seminars on changing employee workplaces and provide regular updates on the project with our city intranet website. Every solution shared this evening will address one or more of these areas. We focused on accessibility needs, meeting room space, public safety, staff space needs, and visitor convenience. So for the remainder of this evening, we're going to focus on the schematic design plans of police and city hall. As I mentioned earlier, it's not uncommon for a project of this size to uncover additional challenge or needs that weren't identified in a high-level planning process. And there are also situations where there can be planning that takes place at a detailed level that can uncover additional needs that we hadn't planned for. With that, after we get through those, we will take a look at conceptual design for the police garage. As I mentioned, things that are not included tonight, we recognize there is a need for a master plan design for the replacement of Fire Station 1. We also have not yet gotten to the program and planning needs of our deferred maintenance for the city garage across the street. Those are definitely items that are scheduled, and they will be brought to council in the future for review. With that said, I'd now like to turn the presentation over to John McNamara, who's going to lead us through the schematic design process.
Mayor, Council, again, I'm John McNamara with Wold Architects and Engineers. As Garrett had said, we have been meeting with core planning team and various subcommittees over the last couple of months to kind of refine our design solutions that encompass all of the items that Garrett had talked about this evening. And so what we wanted to start out our presentation today is kind of talk about the why of what we're trying to do and some of the things that came up during the initial planning stages and some of the things that have changed since we have delved into some of the detail of the solutions that we have. Certainly, we have a design solution today that kind of takes on some of these guiding principles and strategies that the core planning team put together for the initial space study that was done, which really looks at anticipating the needs for the city for the next 20 years and looking at the population build out of around 65,000 people. one of the main tenets of our solutions was looking at how the facility should encourage efficiency, interaction, and collaboration amongst all of the departments. And some of the strategies that we talked about really kind of reflect these in creating more efficient evidence and property management and processing and storage space, achieving the best functional organization for the departments, not just expansion space, a design that creates a natural workflow organization, and we'll highlight that in our solutions this evening, and a comfortable work environment which staff take pride in. And so these are some of the guiding principles and strategies that we looked at. From a programmatic side of things, when we looked at City Hall, our initial programming size for City Hall was currently is about 45,177 square feet. Our solution today, or our planned solution for the long-term plan, doesn't really grow that at all. Most of what our discussions with staff and some of the things that Garrett had talked about with workflow efficiencies really suggest that City Hall itself doesn't need to increase in size. We just need to look at workspaces a little bit differently. For police, there is a planned growth needed for that. That the department, as you're aware, is grown over the years, and staff are in locations that weren't really designed for them, and how police currently does operations. And so we are projecting an increase in the 2025 program. We had initially planned at about 33,000 square feet. With some of the discussions that we've had with staff, our current program and the solution that you see tonight is a little bit higher than that, and I can highlight some of the reasons for that. Some of it has to do with existing space utilization, and then some programmatic things that came up during our conversations. But we're roughly at about 35,000 square feet, so certainly at a schematic design level, a good place for us to be this evening. As you look at our solutions for the building, they have minimal impact on the current site. The current site has adequate space for these improvements and any future improvements that we want to do. The blue highlighted areas are the expansion areas. We are projecting a small entry addition to improve customer service and image for the police department and create a little bit more lobby and restroom spaces in there. We are showing a garage addition on the backside of the building for evidence and evidence processing, and then a garage and locker addition on the south side of the building. And in the yellow, cream colored there is where we would suggest a future garage would also fit on that site. As you look at City Hall, the Phase 1 project really anticipated looking at some of the meeting room spaces and some of the community spaces in the building, as well as improvements to accessibility on the main level. And so our schematic design solution really looks at how could we create some additional conferencing space off of this main lobby. One of the things that kind of came up related to safety and security was the number of entry and staff entry points into the office area, and thinking that we could possibly eliminate one of those. We could create another conference space next to the conference room A/B right across the hall from where we're at now. By simply eliminating that entry point, some of the meetings that occur in the lobby space that you see could now move from the lobby space into an actual conference room. With the also the need to expand and provide accessible restrooms in the building, we're proposing to expand the men's and women's room behind the council chambers to add additional fixtures in there and to create some better handicap accessible facilities there. That change there will impact one of the office spaces in the finance area. And so what we're proposing to do is add an office to replace that off of the kind of what's been called the fishbowl right off of the main lobby here where the windows are there. So we'll close that area up and create an appropriate office for that department. So those are really the only changes that we're anticipating for the main level of City Hall. The lower level of City Hall gets a little bit more work to it. One of the things that we had talked a lot about during the planning stage was how could we use the community rooms more effectively as not only community room space, but also as staff meeting room space. And some of the discussions revolved around the sizes of those rooms being a little bit too large for, more informal meetings and stuff like that. So could we subdivide that space more effectively into potentially 3 rooms that would have flexible folding partitions in there, that it could be opened up to the larger room that you're more used to down there, or subdivided into 3 different size community rooms down there. To do that, we're suggesting to add a small hallway area off to the left-hand side there next to where the IT department is, so that we maintain our staff safety and security by not impacting the entry into the IT area, but creating separate entries into Community Room 1 and 2 off of that main hallway area. In the existing area that we're calling receiving storage, that area, if you're familiar with it, is actually 2 rooms right now. It's actually the old mail room and various other things down in that area. And so by removing the wall in there and cleaning that area up, we can replace some of the storage that is currently over at the police department and move that over to City Hall, where it should be more appropriately stored. One of the other things that is going to occur is when the storage over where the BAC area is gets moved out. That's also an opportunity for some general storage in that area. And then for election storage, there's some additional space that's needed for maintenance and testing of that equipment. So we expect to subdivide that space into a couple of different storage rooms, leaving a small area that's highlighted in that cream color as potential changing rooms to support the fitness room. One of the issues right now with the existing fitness room is that there's no changing space there. Currently, people would have to go over to the police department to change and to shower if they utilize that fitness room, and that's not probably a long-term strategy for that program. And so we're suggesting a couple of small changing rooms off to the side, utilizing some of that existing storage space to accomplish that. Moving on to the police department, which is where the significant investment is going to be in making modifications. And one of the guiding principles around efficiency and interaction and collaboration really revolves around moving all of the functions that are police-related to a singular area and reorganizing those departments in a way that provides a much higher level of collaboration. One of the main changes that we're doing is we're flip-flopping the administration portion of the police department, where the police chief and his administrative staff sit, with where investigations is. And investigations has quite a bit of need based on what our program came up with. And allowing for future growth in that department, we felt that that was a much better location for them, as well as allowing for some interview spaces to be accessed directly off of the lobby. So kind of in the center of the diagram there are 3 rooms that have doors directly off of the main lobby, so that we can have private interview rooms for the police department, so people that come into the facility to meet with an officer don't have to do that business in that very small, crowded lobby area that's in the police department right now. We would improve the restroom facilities, and then one of the key improvements in that area is how we are releasing people out of the detention area. Right now, that area releases right out into the lobby area, which is an inappropriate way to do that. And so our solution anticipates kind of a side release area with a door off of the main lobby. So if somebody needs to either report to the jail function, there's a way to get into that lobby off of the main lobby. We are doing some additional improvements in the detention area. There's currently more holding cells in that area than what are needed, which allows us an opportunity to improve the booking process in the detention area to be more open and in a safer environment for staff, and having a direct garage access to that area on the south side. So what we're anticipating is a garage in that area that would have a transport vehicle in it, and then room for 2 squad cars to come and go, which would load directly into the detention area. That kind of dark line that pokes out of the drawing right there is where the existing building ends today, so everything south of that is an addition onto the building. The green area is our patrol area, which is woefully undersized right now, both in the administration area and in the locker rooms. And so we're anticipating creating an office area for the patrol officers, kind of in that middle area where the patrol label is. That'll include space for workstations for the patrol staff to do their work, a couple of offices for the sergeants in there, and then locker rooms directly to the south there, along with a briefing room and locker rooms for both men and women. The garage on the south side is also for your tactical vehicles for the SWAT. There is 2 spots set up for the tactical vehicles in there, some lockers for the SWAT officers, a small storage room, and then a garage right directly adjacent to it. Separated from the SWAT garage would be where our evidence patrol vehicle would be parked. The lower level of the police station includes common shared space and evidence space. So one of the major improvements that is part of the project is improving how evidence is taken care of at the facility. It's currently in spaces that are undersized and not what I would consider in the best of conditions for what we're trying to achieve in a modern police department. The garage space is not large enough to be able to process a vehicle, and there's a lot of moving of vehicles around in order to do the work that they have to do. There is evidence vehicles that are stored outdoors, which shouldn't be stored outdoors. And so one of the major improvements to this area is creating a evidence garage that can handle up to 2 vehicles at one time. A lot of times over the weekend, they'll take in a couple of vehicles that need to be processed. And so not having to move them in and out, bringing a tow truck in was pretty important to make some changes to this area. So as we talk about things that we discovered during the design phase, we spent probably 2 or 3 meetings with the evidence folks kind of fine-tuning this area and figuring out the best process for how they do work to make sure that our work processes are appropriate and that we have the right type of space for them. So we anticipate about a 3-stall garage down in this area, which would house the evidence van, which is their response vehicle for that, the evidence garage itself, and then a long-term storage facility for any vehicles that have to stay on site for an extended period of time. The other gray area is the evidence processing lab and then a long-term evidence storage room, which is typical for that process. The gun range, we're really not touching the gun range other than to provide a service access corridor to it. And then the rest of the lower level would be general storage for police and records. And then one of the other things that we were asked to do was to look at how could we expand to a indoor parking garage without having a big impact on what the location for the tactical vehicles and the detention garage. And so looking at adding a garage onto this, it's not uncommon to be able to access the tactical garage and the detention garage from inside of another garage. So what we would anticipate is to extend the garage south with a loop traffic pattern in there that would park all of the squads in there. It would also allow a spot for a maintenance location for a tech to work on radios and light bars and that type of stuff, but still maintain access to the detention garage and to the tactical garage. The last image that I have for you is our first rendering of what the new entry to the police department might look like. So we're anticipating coming out from its current location a little bit to be able to expand that lobby area. Looking at our materials, which would likely be brick with some metal on the canopies to kind of match the existing architecture of the building, but yet creating an identity for police that is unique to them. And off to the left-hand side there you see that separate entry that we had talked about, which we've talked about as our jail entry, if you will. And this, so again, appropriately separated from the main process of police and getting those things out of the lobby, which is the best thing that we can do for the police department. So with that, I would throw it back to Dana and Garrett for any questions or our next part of it.
Questions for Mr. McNamara? Any questions? I just see that in comparison, when we did our tour, that the exit for the detention is very much like Richfield and also Lakeville.
Correct, yeah.
Good.
Some similarities also to Brooklyn Park. And
Okay. Mayor, members of the council, I'm going to spend a few minutes just talking about the project cost estimates for Phase 1, which, as a reminder, as Mr. Beck pointed out and as we just reviewed, include the City Hall and police renovations. What you did not see yet but would be included in these costs, the master plan design for the replacement of Fire Station 1. It also includes the conceptual design costs, not the construction costs, but the conceptual design costs for the garage expansion over for our police department. And then it does include a deferred maintenance analysis for the former maintenance facility, city garage, which again, we did not present this evening, but that is incorporated in the cost that you're about to hear. That project cost is $8.7 million. And additionally, there's $1.4 million in deferred maintenance items that have been identified from the 2016 CIP to be included in this project for a total Project One cost estimate of $10.1 million. Can I grab that? Thanks. All right. The chart on the slide in front of you outlines the funding plan that staff have proposed for funding Phase 1 of the project. The 2016 budget included a use of $250,000 of general fund balance. You all levied a $420,000 for facilities. And then as Ms. Stry talked about, you established franchise fees on gas and electric utilities to offset the future property tax increases to fund these facilities improvements, and that was as opposed to the second planned year of the property tax increases. Additionally, the 2016 CIP identified $1.9 million, but as I just mentioned in the previous slide, we've identified 1.4. The reason for the difference is that $500,000 of that funding that was identified in the CIP was actually included in the construction costs, the $8.7 million for the replacement of the generator within the police department. It's nearly impossible for us, it's very unrealistic to work around that. So we decided we had to include that as part of the construction cost. So that's the difference there between the 1.9 and the 1.4 that you're seeing. Finally, the balance of the funding would come from the debt issuance to be repaid over a 10-year time frame, using future franchise fees and the facilities property tax levy. The conceptual design that was presented for the police garage addition as part of Phase 2 construction is for 30 stalls for the first responder vehicles. That's the MARC squads. Right now, we have 26 vehicles, but in order to account for future expansion and make sure we have adequate space for storage of those vehicles for future years, again, 20-year planning horizon, we wanted to make sure that we're planning for the future. That's why we reflect 30. The cost estimate is $2 to $2.5 million. That does not include operating costs.
That's just the police garage for 30 spaces.
Correct.
John, how much is it per space that you guys calculate for per space to build out a garage?
Well, because this is an enclosed garage, it doesn't usually follow some of the normal tenants for like parking ramps and for surface parking type of stuff. So this is for indoor heated space, structure, and everything else. This is roughly, if you did the math on it, it's probably about $60,000 per stall. But the
That's a
cost.
huge increase when you look at multiple housing cost per space. What's the difference?
Mostly it's just because it's a constructed garage versus like an open parking garage type of thing.
Apartment buildings have enclosed garages underground. So the cost is for on the deck, what you're doing now is going to be $60,000 per space.
What we had was we had our cost estimator just do an estimate based on structure cost and, brick and block construction, tempered heating for the garage. And that was the number that they came up with. They didn't do it on a per stall basis. They did it based on square footage and structure and material costs and that type of stuff. So I could get a little more detail on it if you'd like, but we didn't really break it down as a per stall cost.
Okay. Mary?
Am I wrong in suggesting that air handling in such a structure would be a little different from an apartment garage because of idling and other types? It seems to me I read that in somewhere, maybe in the early reports, that would have been a concern.
There is a makeup air system that goes with the garage to be able to handle, vehicle exhaust and that type of stuff.
Okay. Because my car parks in an underground
Sure.
garage.
Mhm.
So, and I know what the cost per space was when that was all built. So they're dealing with air handling within that underground service also, those garages. So I'm just curious,
Sure.
this is an estimate cost, so, okay.
Yeah.
But
We can certainly get more information if you'd like.
That'll
on
be
it.
good, thank you.
Okay, Madam Mayor, members of the council, again, the $2 to $2.5 million cost does not include inflation, so we would suggest a 4% annual inflation cost. Meaning on the low end, because our Phase 2 construction currently is between 5 and 10 years, so on the low end, at $2 million in year 5, you'd be looking at about $2.4 million in year 10, that would be 2.9. If you were on that higher end, the 2.5 million in year 5 would be about 3 million. In year 10, that cost would be 3.7 with a 4% inflator.
Well, we're very aware with how cost goes up, 13 and 5.
Okay, I'm going to move on to some additional design considerations. Now that you've had a chance to see the schematic design as it was presented, there are a couple design considerations that staff would like to present to you all this evening. The first of these is the air handling system within the police department. The solution presented that is included in the $10.1 million is for a supplemental air handling unit. This would be to address some of the challenges that we've discovered as part of this process with our existing system in the police department. Those challenges are capacity, age, and maintenance. First, running the system at an optimal 100% places too much stress on the current system. Blows circuits, causes disruptions. The result is that we're forced to cap the capacity at 97%. The second challenge is age. The current system is 26 years old. It's probably considered middle-aged. And as the system ages, staff are expecting higher maintenance costs, which has proven true. And we expect the unit to run less efficiently over time. It's also important to note that since the needs assessment was conducted 2 years ago in 2014, additional maintenance issues have occurred that have placed additional budget pressures on our maintenance budget. These challenges, along with the fact that we're doing extensive renovations within the police department with walls and ceilings being exposed, we thought it was important to re-examine the replacement of the air handling system as part of Phase 1. With that, the installation and purchase of a supplemental unit, a couple things just to point out. Again, this is included in the $10.1 million of the schematic design. That would require staff to maintain 2 systems. There would be additional maintenance costs to be built into the operations budget for both the supplemental and the existing unit. Installing the supplemental unit would not resolve the maintenance issues that we're experiencing on the existing system. Again, as the system ages, it's going to be more costly to maintain. And we would need to increase our maintenance budget to make sure we can maintain that system. Funding would also need to be identified in the CIP for replacement parts. It's estimated that $1.1 million adjusted for inflation would need to be identified in a future year in our CIP once the system needs to be replaced. And then replacement at a future date would be more invasive and disruptive to police operations. The alternate solution for your consideration this evening is to replace the department's air handling system with one larger unit. This is instead of by adding the supplemental unit. Replacing that system as part of the project now, we would eliminate the need to maintain 2 systems. It would be much more energy efficient. Staff would have better zoning controls, meaning we could manage our maintenance budget better. We would achieve cost savings by replacing this as part of the project. It's less invasive, it's less disruptive. There's also some savings in just general startup costs with the contractor being on site. The cost to purchase a new system obviously increases over time due to inflation. And by doing the air handling system as part of this project, we would essentially take care of all the deferred maintenance items in the police department for the next 20 years. The cost estimate for this is $700,000, so that would be in addition to the 10.1 that was proposed earlier. The second design consideration that we'd like to present this evening is the addition of a shower and changing rooms in the lower level of City Hall. Currently, staff who use the exercise room or work out or maybe ride their bikes to work, use the shower and changing facilities in the police locker rooms. Since we are, with the renovation project, moving the locker rooms further away from the city hall side, that obviously makes it more inconvenient for city hall staff to access that. Also, having a shower and changing room adjacent to the exercise room makes some sense. The other benefit for including this is that it does minimize the non-police personnel using the police locker rooms. We feel this would address public safety as well as employee wellness. The cost estimate for this consideration is between $50,000 and $75,000. $50,000 would be for a male and a female changing room and then one unisex shower. If you add male and female, so gender specific showers, that cost would be $75,000 for this change.
How many people would be using this facility?
Madam Mayor, it's hard to anticipate. We know that there are a handful of staff that regularly work out. We also know that we've received feedback from employees who have indicated that this would definitely be a desirable amenity. It's hard to say because we don't have the facility right now, or it's inconvenient in the city hall side. By having this additional amenity for employees, that there may be an increased use, but it's hard to say. That brings us to the end of our formal presentation. I can just dive right into the discussion question that we have posed for you all. Otherwise, I can pause and take questions.
I think we can ask the questions, but before we get into the discussion, I'd like to hear from those who are here and wanted to speak to this item. So are there any questions for staff? If not, we have Mr. Mike Dumoulin and Mr. Bill Miklas, who wish to address the council on this item.
It's been almost 19 years since I've participated in an official workshop.
And welcome back.
And I have to comment, I miss Charlie Crichton. He
Yeah.
always had a little flavor, didn't he,
Yeah.
to the evening?
Yeah.
But, Madam Mayor, I don't have any prepared remarks. We had talked about this earlier, and I was a part of the initial planning of the building, and mainly, of course, the police aspect of it. And the discussion then and now, and the question came up, was there any discussion regarding the expansion of police enclosed garage for the vehicles? And there was. And we had draft drawings prepared at the time. And I truthfully don't remember how many squad cars or marked vehicles it was to house, but certainly not 30. It was much smaller at that time. Due to the budget considerations and staying on budget, and the council was very insistent that there was only to be a certain amount of money spent and that we were not to exceed that budget. We ended up, after the final schematics drawings had been prepared, we cut what had been proposed by 10%, which we were able to, work within, the confines of what that caused us to do from that standpoint. The plan was, and we had initiated a master police plan, and as I best recall, and you gotta remember now, this was like 30 years ago for me, there was discussion that the plan was to be reviewed in 5 years, and it was, and because again of limitation of funds, that we would then push it to probably 1998 to the year 2000. And then, of course, I left in 1998, and I know that there was some discussion after that And again, restrictive measures in terms of the cost to be expended to whatever the needs of the police facilities were. Back when we did the initial planning study, if you were able to get 10 years out of a police facility in a growing suburban community, a new one, as this was, you were doing very well. So for this facility lasting for the last 30 years, I think you got to commend the staff for doing the best they could in living within those confines. So it's served the community well. And again, the considerations here for you, the council, it's a lot of money, and it always is. And every year that I sat through budgets for 25 years, it really boils down to the money and what's it going to cost, what's that going to do to our taxes, et cetera, et cetera. And here, it's, to me, and this is biased because of my background, but your police facilities certainly should be a high priority in the eyes of a council. And today, especially what's happening, you watch the news, you read the newspapers just as I do, and what it means to have unprotected vehicles, not only from a weather element, but then too from terrorist acts to car bombings to a lot of different things that could happen. 15 years ago, or 10 years ago maybe, probably would not say that or be that insistent that it's a danger that we risk in this community. And I think that we have to be sure that our officers are provided the best tools, squad cars being one of the most important, and that they're ready at all times. I think all of us here probably drive a car, and each of us probably, when we leave here tonight, will go home and park it in a garage, right? The police department can't do that. And then you have the weather elements that have to be dealt with. And again, protecting the longevity of the vehicles and keeping them ready for emergency response. I think that's really key. And it's a tough call for the council. But I think now is the time that if there's a possibility of rearranging the priorities, that a police garage is very much needed. And I think I'm looking here into the future because correct me if I'm wrong, but what did I hear? If you wait and do it later, it's another 8%. And that might be a conservative estimate. It's probably much more. And then you've got to look at, again, the disruption of the operations of the facility of the police department. So any questions that I can help you with, I'd be happy to do that. And one of my old partners here, I'm sure has some things to add too. But
Well,
thank you.
Chief, I really appreciate your coming tonight to speak because you called me and gave me a heads up last year before Christmas and said, you need to take a look at this. And you gave me some history, which I shared with the council. And so when this came up, I was happy to know that you would come and speak because you have a lot of institutional knowledge and also have understood how our police department has evolved.
Oh, very definitely. You know, in fact, a bit of trivia, and most of you may already know this. This is the fifth facility that the police department has been in. We started in the Ames building down on County Road 5. We had a desk on casters, and we'd
Yes.
pull that out from the corner. And when we go in to write a report, and then from there, the city rented space in the dental building at County Road 34 and 5.
Yeah.
And we had half of that building. And then from there, we moved to Highway 13 and shared roughly maybe a third of that building at the most. Outgrew that, and then moved to Fire Station 1, but was actually a public safety
Trailer.
facility for police and fire, okay? And then we moved here in '88, and that was just a godsend from the standpoint of the improvements that we experienced over the years.
And I remember that we had to do a 5-year police master plan when I came into office
That's correct. That's
because
correct.
we were woefully deficient and officers to protect the city.
Yep. The city has done so well in managing its funds that, well, you can see with your Moody's ratings and so on, it's been managed extremely well through your efforts and the efforts of all of the council members over the years. I had an opportunity through the years that I was chief. I worked with every city manager up to the exception of Heather, and with just about every city council member, with the exception of the council that's seated here now. And it's such a difficult job that you have to do. And I really commend you for doing it, because not only just coming to a meeting and having your discussions as you're having, but it's the homework and the research that you do. And the average person or citizen of the community, they don't see that. And they don't see either the work that Heather has to do and all the other staff members, and being prepared, making the best decisions, because what it's all about is what you produce from here and make your decisions on is how we're going to better serve this community. That's what it's all about.
Mary, you had a
Well,
question for the chief?
I was just curious, because I do remember before this building was built, going to a meeting, a big community meeting somewhere, and it was a hot topic, and why was it gonna cost so much and all of that. I don't recall that a garage was proposed at that time, but what I made a note on here is something that you mentioned, Mike. You said it had been brought up again in 98 and 2002. I don't remember any of that. And in the meantime, other investments in
Sure.
facilities were being made, and if
See, I left in the spring of '98.
98.
And at but through the budget, I left in actually April 1st, okay?
Okay.
And interesting date in itself. But it was to be discussed at the upcoming budget. And then again, in the year 2000, the police master plan that we had initiated was to be reviewed every 5 years. And I'm not sure if that plan is even in effect anymore, or
And I don't-
what
I've
was
been on
done.
the council 8 years, and
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it was really key.
Yeah.
We put a lot of time and effort into that.
Yeah, and I remember the master plan because it came before us, and then
Yeah.
that's when we levied 5% of the police budget for 5 years, if you remember. And so we did that, but, that discussion may have gone in internally. It never reached us, Mike, when in 1998, because I was here at the time, and so I don't know. And I think with the change in leadership, that plan probably was not reviewed every 5 years. And, which is too bad, because you did a wonderful job with the plan, but
Well, there
it
was a
didn't
lot
come
of
forward.
citizen involvement.
Oh,
It
my
was
gosh,
a
yes.
excellent partnership.
We appointed,
Absolutely.
was it 13 or 15 citizens to do that work for a year? And they went through everything in police.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Bill Perrin was one of those people.
Yes. Yep.
Art. He's
Nelson.
Nelson,
Nelson.
and quite a
Yeah.
few other folks.
Yeah, that was really a
But those are the
working
ones who are
committee.
still
Yeah,
here.
it was a working committee, not
Yeah.
just a blue ribbon
Yeah.
approach.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Mike before I go to Bill? Yeah, please.
Well, I appreciate the compliments to the council and the mayor and staff for the work they do. But we all know that the men and women in blue carry a much heavier bucket of water and continue today. So thanks for your service for all those years.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It can't be underestimated today in terms of recognizing the imminent danger, actually, not potential, but really imminent danger that exists for our policemen and women when they go out on the street. And it's daily that you hear of these incidents now. So it's a very serious business that they do in service.
Thank you. Bill?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members.
My name is Bill Miklas, and I've been a Burnsville resident for 26 years, but I'm also proud to be a Burnsville police officer for 29 years. I retired as a sergeant. Much of the SWAT room stuff that was on the screen there earlier was my territory. I was an investigator as well as specializing in the patrol division. Since I left Burnsville, I continued on in the business as a business person. I started a consulting business and training consulting in law enforcement matters. Worked successfully for 14, 15 years there. And ultimately right now I'm working with one of my clients. They hired me to be a full-time manager, associate director of the Upper Midwest Community Policing Institute. So we're still in the business. We're still doing the work, and it still amazes me, however, that police work is as complicated as it is right now, sophisticated and complicated. Right now, you heard what happened today in Minneapolis when they issued new policies dealing with the sanctity of life, and then de-escalation must be used before use of force, reporting and managing excessive uses of force. That is the one side that's going on. And the other side is police officers are being randomly shot and killed in their own parking lots while they're stopping and getting fuel on the streets, on car stops. And again, the preparedness for one is just the opposite of preparedness for the other. So it's very complicated. I call this schizophrenia of policing, because you don't know what's going to be, what you'll be doing. And it seems like the parameters are getting wider and wider each day. With that in mind, you've heard much of the arguments that I have listed in my own pieces of work here. I have worked with large departments and small departments. I've worked with 8 years with the University of Northwestern University out of Evanston, Illinois, and their Center for Public Safety as a course director and a instructor in the School of Police Staff and Command, a 10-week school that our executives of this department have attended as well. It matches the FBI National Academy. In that respect, I've worked with small departments from the size of Park Rapids, Minnesota, with 10 officers, to Philadelphia Police Department with over 7,000. Each of them have their own issues, but similar problems as we are having here. In trying to do a data analysis on how many agencies have underground parked garages, it's hard to accomplish and collect that figure, because it's often just left up to the communities to decide. And yet at the same time, communities are deciding, given the same issues that you're dealing with tonight, how much money do we have, how far can it go, and how do we level a standard of care, live up to a standard of care that I'm proud that this council has supported throughout the years that I've been with Burnsville. Some of the things that I have written down here, I'll just go through and offer my anecdotal information on it. Having underground parking garage will enhance officer preparedness and during all seasons and weather conditions. Preparedness and readiness, as Chief Dumoulin mentioned, is sometimes measured in minutes or seconds, and sometimes in inches as well. And to be ready, to have your equipment ready to go, to have it not be too cold, not be too warm or hot, is all important here, because an underground facility with temperature control would also offer protection to that equipment that is in those vehicles. The equipment, again, radios, computers, medical equipment, weaponry that's in those vehicles now, whether they're in the passenger compartment or the trunk, need to be monitored and checked regularly and maintained at various industry-suggested standards. And I think the operation of a garage like this would help that process. As Chief Dumoulin also mentioned, the police killings are happening more randomly and more often. Increased safety factors and protection for both officers and attended vehicles are important here. Whether you want to be prepared for terrorism or still prevent or provide a hardened target for whoever might approach and see the police department in the city of Burnsville as a target or as a threat to them, having indoor parking would aid in the protection of the equipment and the officers as well. Offering the community a more timely response in any weather conditions, again, matter of seconds, you're providing public safety services, and I'm more looking at it from now as a public safety consumer. And I'd like to have fewer distractions going from that the officers have to worry about when they're heading towards an emergency call, which might be at my home. I'll talk more about that in a bit. Reduce the number of idling squad cars because of cold weather or hot weather would be also a factor here. I haven't heard anyone mention creating a large enclosed open space for the mustering of large groups of either department members or for sheltering community members, but it appears that a garage for 30 squad cars, 30 stalls, would offer that in the case of a weather emergency or where we had to move people into a shelter. This might be one of them. Reduce the potential risk of injury to officers from a risk management standpoint, cleaning and checking your squad cars on a slippery road surface out in the parking lot, which has been done before, which has been, we're able to do, but at the same time it increases the chance that an injury may occur. This would help to reduce that opportunity. I want to go back to reducing distractions. Just today, I heard something on public radio regarding the increased need to enforce distracted drivers. And from being one and having fewer pieces of information available to me 10 years ago, 15 years ago, police officers can easily be distracted and overwhelmed by some of the material that they have, information that they have coming towards them. Having to worry about whether their car is going to be warm enough or cold enough or have that ice cleared off in time while they're responding to emergency. Certainly they shouldn't be responding with icy windshield, but at the same time, commitment to get there as quickly as they can under those given conditions are important. And I feel that this would be, again, a way to reduce distractions of our own drivers and make it safer for them and safer for the citizens as well. The bottom line, I guess, for me is a standard of care. I listened to all the presentations and I heard over and over again, and Chief Dumoulin's compliment to this council is echoed by myself as well. The city does live up to a nice and wonderful standard of care that is in keeping with my standards, and that's why I keep living here. I like it here. I like the way you make decisions. I like how you do things. You're conservative, but you spend money when you need to in a way that's meaningful. And I would like to seek your approval here, or your support at least, to approve the underground garage in phase 1 of this redevelopment process.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the chief and Bill? I really appreciate your coming and speaking, because it's valuable to hear from two people who have been here, who understand what's going on, but are in the industry and still very much involved, Bill. And I know that you, Chief, continue to be very well read with regards to what's going on in public safety, because you do tell me about it. And I really appreciate that. So I thank you for your coming and for speaking in support of the garage, because I too believe that it's essential.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Okay, Madam Mayor, are you
Yeah.
ready? Madam Mayor, members of the council, we can redirect your attention back to the slides. Staff's really looking for direction from you all this evening in terms of how to proceed with the next steps of the design. And with that, are there any specific design considerations you would like for staff to incorporate into the design at this time? We did present two design considerations: the replacement of the air handling system for a cost of $700,000, and the shower and changing rooms in the lower level of City Hall.
And these two are for Phase 1.
These two would be for Phase 1, correct, Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Uh,
Suzanne?
It seems to me that the replacement of the air handling system is, it's really an option? It seems like it's more of something that should just be done.
As part of the bigger project.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, we're at the end of the life of the current one. We're going to be doing major renovation. It doesn't seem to make sense just to add a second one and still have the old one and then later have to replace that one. So to me, that piece is just a given, should be included.
Showers and changing room? Could go to Phase 2.
It could go to Phase 2. I feel like it, personally, I feel like it is kind of more of a want. I know people like to work out and shower, but I've never had that luxury where I've worked before, so to me, I feel like that's, I know it'd be really nice. I know the folks that work out would like it, but I think it's something we could push to Phase 2.
Okay. Dan?
Well, today, I'm better equipped to make a decision related to our facilities, and it's only after many discussions. And I have to point out the facilities tour to the other cities was invaluable. A lot of it is, you see the same kind of thing, but you begin to see it and put it in perspective when you're presented with, a list of options. It's really tough to make a decision if you haven't been there in person as well as read all the background and kind of put it all together. It was invaluable to me. So really, for me, this whole project has now come down to a matter of priorities. That's the decision, in my opinion. And there is only one priority that is both urgent and important, in my mind, and that is the police department and public safety. I think when I look at this overall facilities, we sort of, it looks as though we pretty much equated all priorities to be pretty much the same, because we have some really, we have a lot of wants right next to absolute needs. And I think, for me, I want to put the needs first and address the wants later. For me, Phase 1 is all about one thing only, and that is the PD and the garage, period. Everything else related to City Hall is a want, and it can be in Phase 2 or Phase 3, and it doesn't impact the city in the same way that this need impacts the city and our law enforcement officers for the next 30 years. So, yes.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
May I respond?
Dana.
Councilmember Keeley, just something to note, and we didn't mention this before, but part of our relocation, we didn't talk about relocation at all, but as we move forward with the police renovations, the plan is to move the entire police personnel out of the police department, the building, and in order to do that, we need to relocate them. To keep those costs down, we've decided to use our own city facilities, and in doing so, one of the locations that we've identified are the large community rooms, Conference Room E, and some of the area in the lower level of City Hall where we could more easily secure that space. One thing that should be noted, when they vacate and go back to a year from now, 18 months from now, and they go back to the police department, they will have really, really beat the tar out of that area.
Great facility.
And
Temporary
so,
space.
so we would expect to have to do something to bring that facility, whether it's the flooring, the wall coverings, back into use.
So that would be in about 2 and 3 years.
Yes,
2
Madam
and
Mayor.
3 years. So,
Well, yeah,
About a
when
year
they
and a half
vacate,
to
so maybe
2 years.
18
Yeah.
months to 2 years.
Yeah.
Mhm.
okay.
So
Yeah.
let me follow. So and Heather mentioned this on the phone when we talked, so is,
Facility.
is the,
Yeah, I mean,
is the need for that temporary space, does that space need to be remodeled now, or before they move into it, or after they move out of it?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Keeley, I would say after they move out.
Okay.
Mhm.
So what, if they're gonna move out of PD and move into this temporary space, that's gonna displace what that space is used for today.
Correct.
What does that trigger as far as other uses of the building, or the uses that used to have that space, where are they gonna go?
Councilmember Keeley, we anticipate, the council chambers is available.
Sure,
That
being used for meeting
perhaps
space
the
then.
Ames Center would have some space, but
So basically what you're saying is, you have a plan to be able to move them into a temporary space during phase one, as maybe the end of phase one, after they then move back in. That space needs to be remodeled.
correct.
And inclusive. So do we have a cost number attributed to that section of this, or that piece of this bigger plan?
In 2 years,
Yeah, which we would incur in about 18 months to 24 months, as you
in
say.
terms of what we're going to pay for it in 2
Yeah.
years.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, I'm not certain I know the exact cost off the top of my head. Maybe John can help. But one of the things that you might want to consider is if you decide to make improvements to the community room, we haven't talked about fit and finishes yet. That's really the next phase of the design. And so there are things that we can do, finishes that we can look at that would help control those costs. As part of the community room use, they do get a lot of uses. There are over 950 on average, about 950 different groups utilize the conference room spaces, including the conference rooms downstairs. They are used for wedding ceremonies, birthday parties, quinceaneras. And so one of the things that staff had looked about to help increase the revenue and increase the usage and the appeal to these rooms, in addition to being staff space, but more community space, was to put better finishes that would allow more flexibility with how that space and help drive some of the additional revenue, because it would be more appealing.
Well, that's
Okay.
a
So
smart
you're looking
investment.
at it as the back end of phase one.
Correct.
Right. Do we have a number, well,
Well,
we've
they-
seen the number of your proposed phase one.
Yeah,
Do you have
estimates.
a
I don't
revised
have any-
number for a different looking phase one?
Not at this time, but if
Okay.
that's something that the council is interested in getting, we can certainly peel out those costs and look at
Okay.
different options.
Bill?
I'll answer the question sort of in order. First of all, it seems to me, the way it was presented, the replacement of the air handling system seems to be a need. And so I would likely be for that. The shower and changing rooms, to me, are a complete want. I may never be for that. The third thing is, I'm still for the phase two for the police garage, and I'll all go back to, I want the former chief to know and others to know, we've had significant amount of conversations with, among ourselves and with the Chief Giesecke, and it all goes back to even the beginning conversation I had with Chief Giesecke about this. And back then, the police garage was somewhere in the 15 to 20-year, maybe never picture. My recollection is that I made a proposal that it be moved to phase two. I thought that was reasonable. We, as part of that whole conversation, it was about how would we, in general, finance the renovation. Dan Keeley, a year before, 2 years before, had brought up franchise fees in Elk River in terms of financing street infrastructure. Through conversation with council, we decided that would be a reasonable way to allocate the cost to, various folks in the community in a fair way. And there was further discussion about how then would we pay for the firehouse and the police garage in Phase 2. And we had further discussion at the all-day work session much later in the day about maybe even raising some of those franchise fees in 2017 and on to cover those costs. Well, now going back to my conversation with the chief, it essentially was, chief, if it was moved to Phase 2 sometime in that timeframe, would that be satisfactory? And his response was, yes, that'd be satisfactory, it'd be on the table, and that would, at that point, meet his needs. Now, that may have changed. I take the chief at his word, and that's, you can apply the same cost factors to the other, the 23 million plus costs minus the 8 million or whatever, you can apply that to carrying costs or extra costs down the road to any of the, to the firehouse one, to any of those things. So, anyway, so for me, it's garage, police garage, and Phase 2, and that's where I'm at.
Mary?
I have a question for Mr. McNamara. I know the answer, but I don't know if everybody else does. Is this an area of expertise, facilities planning, for your firm?
Yes.
And you've done other police departments, one or two?
Quite a few, yes.
All right. So the reason I didn't go on the tour of the other facilities departments is because I know what your firm does. Back in my other life, I actually had, you were one of my customers, believe it or not. So I know your firm, and I know what you do, and I know you do it well. And I am very pleased with what you've given us. I also feel that what you've given us has definitely been focused on the problems at our police department, and I know down the line you're going to be looking at our fire department as well, because that's what you do. So I don't see the changes that you are talking about in the other parts of City Hall as being fluff or anything like that. I think that Ms. Hardy really explained that well, that it's all of a piece. Furthermore, I want to say that I agree with Bill, everything he said, because I do feel that you're dealing with the most critical need of PD right now, which is evidence processing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very happy to see what you've done, and I think it's great. But I also am very pleased to see how you took what we had come up with at the all-day work session to make sure that the covered garage plan gets into the plan, so we're not doing any redos later. And that it does not get lost, and it does not get preempted by any other construction projects that somebody on council might have an idea of doing. So it's there, and I hope that's comforting to the former members of our police department and our current members of the police department, because I think it's very important to be there. Another reason that I really want to go with Phase 1, as staff has proposed it, is that I do think that staff has done a wonderful job by engaging all departments and looking at this in a holistic manner. We can't isolate that. Furthermore, this morning in today's Wall Street Journal, the main article is, localities opt for less debt over new infrastructure. And if you'll bear with me, I pick out a couple of things, and they're not out of context. There is an anti-tax sentiment, says Dan Seymour, an analyst with Moody's Investment Service. Even as state and local governments are looking at lower bond yields, they are facing a public that is reluctant to pay more taxes. Now this, despite the fact that we've gotten a few emails who said, I'll pay more taxes. Those of us who are in elected office, we know there's a lot of tax resistance out there. So I would also like to say here too, that S&P Global Ratings analyst John Sugden said that in many places, the hesitation to invest in facilities reflects good budget management by governments whose revenue projections leave no room for additional debt payments or upkeep costs for newly constructed projects. I would like to add to that, that we do have some things that are unknown right now. We don't know what Superfund is going to cost this city. It's going to cost us a lot. We also don't know what the economy is going to be like. We've had a good run for the last few years. Yes, it hasn't been exactly wild, but employment is full right now. And we all, especially probably I'm the one who's seen more cycles, economic cycles than anybody in this room. Economic cycles happen. I think, because I'm not going to be running for reelection, that my most important legacy would be to make sure that this community does not jeopardize its AAA bond rating. And therefore, I really want to take the guidance and do this phase one first, and then make sure that those schematics are in there for the garage in phase two. I don't want to stretch out any more than that. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Suzanne, what are your thoughts about the garage?
Madam Mayor, may I hear your thoughts first?
Oh, thank you.
I think I did.
I'm happy to do that. You know, we've had a lot of discussions, yes, and not all of them have been consensus around this issue of the police garage. So I'm going to also look at it in terms of what is essential and a need and what is a want. It is essential for us to ensure that our police department has what it needs so that they can deliver service to the citizens of this community. All cities are feeling the effects of other police agencies' action. And for me, it is our responsibility as elected officials to make the right decisions to protect the men and women who protect this city. And the assets that they use in delivering that kind of service. One of the things that Chief Dumoulin spoke to and Bill Miklas spoke to, and also everything that we read about, talks about the high risk to law enforcement personnel. And I do not want the blood of any of our officers on my hands or your hands if we don't do the garage, because we've heard, and yes, absolutely, there are conflicting information or conflicting opinions about whether it's an essential need or not. But for me, it is an essential need to protect them, to ensure that those vehicles are not going to be compromised when they're out there, whether people can put bombs underneath the car. It's a very volatile environment that we have in our country today. And the lives of those men and women who protect this city is of the utmost importance. So, like Councilmember Keeley, I believe all of the needs and replacements and improvements for police is of high need and demand. And also that includes the garage for the 30 vehicles that you have. John, the facilities we looked at, all of them had garages. And I'm willing to say that when you worked with all of those departments, they all saw the essential need for those garages for their vehicles.
Well, all of those had a priority of covering the vehicles for the projects that we went out and saw, yes.
Yes. And I believe that it was also a priority for this police department. Thank you. You didn't say it, but you smiled, because it is a priority for this police department. But there have been conflicting information, and what we need is to make sure that the need was there in an addendum in one of your reports, John, July of 2014.
It was in the master plan, yes.
Yes, it was. So it wasn't that it wasn't a need, and it wasn't that it wasn't for phase one. It was there.
Right.
It was there. And so it is a need, and we need to do that. So the air handling system, yes. Showers and changing room, phase 2 or 3, if it ever gets there. But police and everything that they need needs to be done. That garage needs to be there. And the air handling system while we're there doing that. That's where it's at for me. Dan?
If I may, before Councilmember went, I omitted some of my notes that I'd written in why I'm taking the position that I'm taking. There's a lot of reasons, but this is an investment in the next 30 years. I don't want to repeat what happened to us, and I was a part of it. In 2011, when we invested $650-some thousand into Fire Station Number 1, and now it's deemed end of life, and we have to basically take that 650 and demolish it and rebuild it again. So in a cost-saving, an overly sensitive cost-saving situation, we made a choice to spend $650,000 where we should have looked at it as a bigger picture and took a different approach, because we basically threw away that money, and it's embarrassing to admit. I don't like doing that. So I want to make sure that we take the long view of the next 30 years. First and foremost, safety of our officers. Today, things have changed in the last year. When we started having this discussion, things weren't happening that are happening today. And that has changed how we have to look at this. Protection of our equipment, our technology. The technology that's in those vehicles today is nothing like it was 5 years ago. In the next 5 years, in the next 10, it's going to even get more expensive, more high-tech, more sensitive to temperature changes. The morale of our officers in Blue, you know, and this kind of gets into recruitment. We've already seen more and more cities add covered garages for their police. We cannot put ourselves in a position to be uncompetitive in future recruitment years, because already there is a national fall-off in interest in applying for law enforcement. And the workforce is not going to get any bigger, it's actually going to get smaller. So we're battling something that's sort of an unknown today. It's not really staring us in the face per se today, but it's the trend, and this is something I personally watch. The trend is most definitely there. There is going to be a significant challenge. So we have to set ourselves up to be in a position to at least be competitive, continue to be at the forefront, to be a great city, and also have an opportunity for future law enforcement to want to pick Burnsville versus other cities. And so that's really that list of things that sort of supported my statement earlier when I said this is priorities. And I've been in this decision before, sitting on this council for the last 9 years, where we said, you know, we only have so much funds. I think Chief Duhlman referred to that many times in his comments, and he's right. There's always a restriction on what we can do. But I separate, and maybe this is my business ownership background, when you employ a bunch of people and you have to sweat every dollar, you really look at what is a capital investment and what is an ongoing operating cost. This is a capital investment discussion. This is not an ongoing operational cost discussion. And so there is some operational that goes with it, and it was noted that, you know, if we do this, there's going to be some additional costs. But this is a capital investment
that's going to take us the next 30 years. That is not the same as a levy discussion with cost drivers like labor and wages and that kind of stuff. And you all know exactly where I'm at there. I'm always looking for new ways to deliver new efficiencies. This is a different kind of deal. And so we have to make these decisions. We have to make them intelligently. I think we are. I think we did it right this time. We didn't in 2011. And this is something that the city is going to see, use, law enforcement's going to work in for the next 30-plus years before this cycle comes back around again, and the facility has to be looked at once again. Officer Dumlin, or Chief Dumlin, mentioned 10 years was good. Wow, that's a short period of time for a big capital investment. So I think we did right by getting the 30 years out of it, but that came at a cost. At a cost of the law enforcement, at a cost of morale, at a cost of making do over and over and over again. And aside from the fact that this started many, many years ago with a discussion of a garage, it's too bad that it's gone this long. But it's time to do the right thing. It's time to invest in it. It's time to put it in place. And there are factors today that are influencing this decision that didn't exist 10, 15 years ago when it was talked about and thought about and put in a 5 or a 10-year plan. And 30 years later, it still doesn't exist. So there's a lot of reasons going into this decision. But when I put it against all the other things that came out of our facility study, there's just no question in my mind. I would make this decision today. I would have made the same decision 5 or 6 years ago before all these other issues in society became obvious. That this is the first priority because it's a need. And the wants go second or, next. And those are the ones that we go, okay, when we can afford it, we'll get to it. But this is a need that we address today.
Okay.
So thank you.
I just want to finish my comments with regard to the bond rating. I'm very proud in the time that I've served that we've gone from a AA to a AA plus to a AAA to a double AAA. So I will go to New York, to the committee, and defend our bond rating. And also because we do have a revenue stream to pay for these improvements that we are going to be doing for the facility, for police, and for Fire Station 1 and any of the other ones that come, because those are the two most important needs. The other thing is that our citizens have said in the resident and business survey, when we asked the question, what is the most essential services and the most important, it was police and fire, and they were at 98% of the residents and business of this community. So it is essential, and I will go to New York, or they can come here. They've come here twice, the rating agencies. They came when we were doing the heart of the city, and they came 3 or 4 years ago when you and I sat down with two of those folks, and I'm willing to do that again. And I'll fly to New York and sit with the committee because I know I can talk to them about what this is about. Besides, there are other methods. I've talked to U.S. Bank and some of the folks there. They also talked to Heather and to Kelly. There are other methods that we can look at in terms of preserving our bond rating. Suzanne?
I think Mary has a
Okay.
A couple of questions. First of all, you talk about a bank. A debt is a debt is a debt. The second thing is, how can you guarantee revenue streams? How can you guarantee what Superfund is going to cost this city?
Well,
How can you guarantee that the economy will not take a downturn?
We can't guarantee any of those things in the past.
And we are looking
Yeah.
at the big surprise we had in the financing of the BPAC, because that was coming out of tipping fees, and guess what?
Yeah.
So, you know what, you can go to New York, but I'm afraid they're gonna.
Yeah. You
I
know,
mean,
there are all these.
These
Yeah.
are realities that I think that we have to look at. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have a garage. I don't think Mr. McNamara was saying we shouldn't have a garage. The garage now, it's on paper, is going to happen. It's not going to be just say, oh, we'll do it someday, which is apparently what Chief Dumoulin was dealing with. And it kept happening even as late as 98 and 92. So we've got it on paper.
Yeah.
I'm happy with it. I think it's great. Do it in phase
Okay.
two.
It's essential for phase one. Suzanne?
Well, first, I just want to thank staff again for all of the work that they put into talking and developing the facility study and the design. Very nicely done. Thank you. I know it was a lot of hard work, many hours were put into, and a lot of thoughtfulness about what the needs were. My frustration is, I didn't really know that the garage was essential. I understand the why it's important. The main thing I see is we live in Minnesota, and it's the scraping of the ice and the warming of the vehicles, and when having the climate control. So for me, again, I was very happy that we did put it on our phase two. My concern with moving it at this point, especially now we have to put in the air handling system. How are we going to pay for it?
Well,
That
we
is-
have franchise fees that are in place, and we just had our staff tell us how we're going to be paying for it. And remember, this is when we do the bonding for one part, that's the bonding for that. That doesn't mean the whole 23 million is going to be in that first bonding. It's
Right.
only the construction of what we need to get done.
Can,
And then-
Madam Mayor?
Ms. Strike, or Dana,
Yeah.
could you
Councilmember
answer
Nguyen,
that for us?
we mentioned franchise fees. The franchise fees that are currently in place are enough to cover the $10.1 million that we
Yeah,
talked about.
that's
So any change, so any additions, the garage the $2 million, whatever other additions would have to be covered by a property tax increase.
Well,
Or
Dan?
firm numbers on the franchise fee. You have you just presented it as an
Correct. Yeah.
ultra conservative number. I've heard a number as high as $1 million. We don't know yet. And I will tell you that if it's 100,000 more, we could finance the $2.5 million over 20 years and cover that payment. So
Yep.
we don't have everything. What I'm saying is we don't have everything in front of us. Number one, we don't have a revised number, right, of what shifting things around would be, and we don't have a firm number on the franchise fee revenue. So we're kind of making a decision. Really, I think tonight we're just asking staff to come back with a new revised plan with this look and some firm numbers from the franchise fee. So we really have something more concrete to work with, because we're kind of guessing.
Yeah. Heather?
The timing is such, though, that we have to set a maximum property tax increase before we're going to have all the information. And so what staff is likely to come back to you with for September would be, what I'm hearing is the air handling system. I've heard at least 4 folks say that should be in the base. And then I don't know what the consensus is on the garage yet, but that we would likely come back with a property tax increase with that. Now, we could come in below that if we get better information. You don't set your final levy until December. But in order to, because we're talking about bond issuance, we're likely to bring forward, depending on what your final decision is here tonight, a property tax increase to our debt levy associated with those changes.
Simply because you don't have the firm numbers of the
Correct.
franchise fee. Yeah.
Correct.
And we have to do one before the other because of the max tax
Correct.
vote that we have to take.
Yeah.
Right.
Correct.
Or we can wait, as we continue this discussion and get firm numbers, this decision can be made later on in January.
Sure, I mean, the max tax could go up by 3
Yeah.
or 4 points or whatever, and we could end up no different than where we are today at 3.6, or could be even less. We don't have all the numbers available to us from a revenue side, from the franchise fee, to really make a determination. And I appreciate the fact that you're using conservative numbers.
Bill?
I've made my determination. I want to be clear about that. I've made that decision.
Well, 2 of us have made our decision also. Now it's up to Suzanne whether she would like to see the garage in phase 1, and we continue to look at the numbers.
Would the chief like to comment at all, or you feel?
Giesecke?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, thank you, and Councilmember Nguyen, thanks for asking my opinion. First of all, I want to say this, I appreciate everyone's hard work on this. City manager, staff, Dana, Garrett Beck, a lot of work has gone into this, just like all of you have mentioned. This has been a long process. And so I want to recognize everybody's collective efforts. I've seen a lot of work behind the scenes. I've seen good teamwork. I've seen staff have some tough conversations about this, so I think it's important to recognize that. Second thing, I'd like to recognize the fact that I realize this isn't just about the police department. As you heard from retired officers, you do a great job. As council members, you have tough decisions to make, and I certainly respect the tough decisions that you have to make now and in the future, so I realize that's not an easy job. I realize you have competing interests. Obviously, I think it's important. Ultimately, things have changed in the last 8 months. And I agree with Councilmember Coughlin. We had discussions at one point when it was on a 20-year plan. I was greatly concerned about that. We had a discussion, could it move up to phase 2? I thought that was great. Since that time, if you look at what's happened in the world, to our own police department, it's a different environment. So I just ask that you consider that when you make it. I ask that you make the best decision you can and the most informed decision that you think you need to make, and I'll respect that decision. But I do think it's important. I know it's important to our troops. They have concerns for their safety. And I'm not trying to sensationalize, but those are things you heard me talk about at the all-day work session. I don't think I need to talk about those specifics. Again, you've heard a lot of those tonight. I'm just saying thank you for your consideration, everyone's consideration. Thank you to the public for the support we've been given. Ultimately, I'm leaving that decision up to you based on the information you have, but do I think it's important? Absolutely I do. I know our cops think it's important, and every day when you turn on the news and you look at the things that are going on in this country, it's a different environment. It's a different place that we live. It's a different type of policing. And I know the officers that are watching tonight, if I said, well, it can wait, they would lose respect for me as a police chief. So I'm not trying to influence your decision. I'm just telling you what I believe. What I believe, I think it's important, but ultimately, I respect all of you to make the best decision you can when you have all the information you think you need.
And this
I don't
is
know
for the garage,
For the garage.
yes.
Does that help or confuse the situation more? Because that was not my intent to confuse anybody,
No,
but just to
thank
tell
you
you,
very much.
as most of you know me, I'll speak from the heart. I'll speak what I believe to be true, and I'll let you folks make that decision ultimately where it lands. Anything further?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Now it's up to you, Councilmember Nguyen.
Okay, I just have one more question to clarify the funding part. Ms. Johnson, you said that we won't have any firm numbers before we need to set the max tax.
Not before the max tax, Councilmember Nguyen, no.
And when do you think
We're
those
gonna,
numbers
I mean,
would be
as
available?
each month passes, we get better information, and you make your
Uh-huh.
decision in the first part of December, so we'll have better information at that point in time. In terms of the estimates, for the cost estimates for the project, we won't have any sort of more refined estimates to actually bid the project, which would be in the first quarter of next year. And so, as I think you saw in the background, you could potentially do a bid alternate for any components of that as well, which would then have firm numbers upon which you would make your decisions, so.
So at this point, it wouldn't affect what this year's tax levy, but it would affect next year. Is that correct?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Nguyen, it will affect the 2017 tax levy. We would plan it as such, so you would have resources in the 2017, depending on what the decision is. I'm hearing at least $700,000 in increase. If there's another 2 to 2.5 million, we would plan that in as an additional tax levy increase. Now, if we get better information and the franchise fee revenue comes in better, our final levy recommendation to you all in December would be lower.
So really, the only issue is the max tax, which is not binding to anything. It's just except that we can't go over. But we can go as far under as we want.
Yeah. And the other is that
How are you gonna
Until
go
we
under
get-
with
well-
more?
Well, and the
Debt.
other is that if we don't have good numbers, can wait and get, decide on in January. If we don't do it and it doesn't get on the levy in December. And we continue to work on the numbers and the franchise fees.
Madam Mayor, I'm confused, just, that would delay the project, because we wouldn't have any
Yes,
money to do
yes,
the project. Okay, I just
Because we
wanted
need to
to.
understand the numbers rather than having all these estimates. Yes.
Madam
Dana?
Mayor, members of the council, as part of our design development process, we plan to be back in front of council at the October 11th work session. One thing to consider is staff could continue to work with Wool to refine the numbers, and as we get through the design process, we may have better information. Although that's going to pass the max tax, since you're going to be acting on that in September, but we would have another opportunity to have better information at the October 11th work session.
I mean, I do have concern that we would be stopping the process, which is what we would be doing.
Well, not stopping. We're going to continue to work on the numbers and make sure that we have good numbers. The process doesn't stop. It's just delayed.
But by how much? A couple
I mean,
months?
yeah, I mean, the thing is making the right decision. Making the right decision for a long-term investment and for the police department. Yes, Bill.
I'm confused. In September, early September, we have to set the max tax.
Yeah.
For next year. We've just potentially added a $700,000 number.
Yeah.
That's going to already have a significant effect on it. Then, when you say we don't know numbers, well, we have to put a $2.5 million, factor in a $2.5 million on a bonding too. That would also be a levy unless we're going to kick that into 2018 somehow, which I'm not, unless you, depending. So again, so that's how I see it now. So I'm willing to suffer the $700,000 with the max tax, but I'm not willing to have some room for max tax to deal with some other number to go below. So again, I'm still in the second phase, 5 year. And I think the conversation, at least the way I was hearing it, Mayor, was getting confused. I was getting confused by the conversation. I'm just trying to.
Mary?
Well, and I think part of what's confusing the conversation is that we've had a lot of emotional arguments here. And I do think we've had an expert in facilities planning, we've had our staff core committee, we've had representatives from all the departments, including police department, to look at what the priorities are in this need. And there's no doubt, when we toured the facilities, the police department, I mean, I've been in there a lot, but I saw parts in the police department I had never seen before, and I was horrified. I think we all were. How could this have been going on so long? How could this have been going on so long? We have to rectify that. But I don't think the best way to do that is to succumb to emotional arguments. I think that we have to look at data, we have to look at expertise, when we have to look at the big picture of the entire community as a whole and all the staff at City Hall. And not only City Hall, but also in the fire department, because we've got a real problem over there in Fire Station 1. I mean, where are you gonna draw the line? And wherever you draw the line, somebody's gonna be mad. So I do think that to stick with the data, to stick with the evidence that is recommended or in the quotes here that I read from today's journal, that we have to be very disciplined. We have to have fiscal discipline, and fiscal discipline means that you have to guard against the emotional arguments.
Dan?
There's a lot of data that does stir a few emotions. Today, there's a lot of officers dead. That's data. Today, officers' safety is questionable
That's data.
I know, we need to get them out of their cars.
Exactly. Today, we need to
That's-
protect them. That's data that drove that decision. I agree with you 100%. There's more than enough data, in my opinion, to justify this. I want to also point out what I said earlier. Tonight, we're setting the max tax as a not to go over. That really doesn't have any bearing after today until we know more facts. But we have to set a max tax to say this is the most it can be
Yeah.
by law. There are tools in our toolbox that we haven't even talked about yet, beyond just the franchise fee. So before we make as if this is our December decision, because I feel like that's what we're getting into as a final December decision, let's keep it in perspective as just a max tax. I guess maybe this is for you, Councilmember Wynn. Keep it in perspective, this is a max tax that we're deciding on tonight. And we need to give staff some direction to say, what if this were to be the case? This is the max tax that you would have to vote on. And then everything from there really works down. There are things in our budget that we can shift. There is likely, based on what we've heard, and I've heard this more than once from more than one staff person, likely more in the franchise fee than what we've seen today. And that can fund a lot of debt.
Debt
2.5
service.
million over 20 years is not that big of a payment, let's put it that way. Any increase of 100 to 150,000 in that franchise fee covers the cost of
The
that
debt
garage
service.
over 15 or 20 years. Even if it doesn't, there's other money that we could shift to cover that without increasing our levy. Not all the facts are in front of us. I see lots of opportunity to fund this. I do not see this as a financial issue tonight.
Yeah.
This is just a max tax decision, and we need to give staff some direction to be able to bring another max tax estimate back to us that we
The
ultimately
estimate for
vote
the
on.
project.
That can accommodate it, to Heather's point. You have to sort of look at it as, you have to say the general fund will have to cover it for this discussion, but they're going to go back and bring hard numbers back to us. And there's other things that I see that I'll bring up in that discussion where we can fund this, where it ends up not being a levy increase.
Yeah.
That's all we need to talk about tonight. We don't need to cure the problem tonight like this is our December levy vote.
The thing we have to do is just direct staff, is the garage in phase 1 or phase 2? And that is up to you.
Well, my concern is with the 3.6, which is what we agreed on tonight, and probably will agree on. Of course, you're going to continue to work on that, but my concern would be that, because the way I see it from what we have, I don't know what's in your toolbox, but there's not a lot to cut. There's not a lot we can do without hurting. It comes down to people, and I'm not willing to cut staff.
This is
Yes.
remember, this is a capital expense.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a one-time
Yeah.
capital investment. We don't have to come up with money except for the debt service portion of this, okay? But we can actually massage
Yeah.
that, right? There's other monies that we have not committed that can reduce this increase. For instance, the air replacement system. There's no reason we have to issue debt for that. We have funds that can pay for that.
There's a fund balance.
Yes.
And remember,
So,
it said,
there's-
to be determined.
Yes, so, like, again, if we want to get into the full deep depth, we can have this full discussion and lay it all out. I don't think we need to.
Yeah.
We need to
Yeah,
set the
tonight's
max tax, allow staff to go back and by the time we do that max tax, we'll have better data than we have tonight, and we'll be able to make a better decision. But if the max tax has to go up a little bit, as to Heather's point, we don't have enough data to do anything except increase it by an amount that would be a levy increase to cover the 700 and other things. But we haven't even talked about all the tools to pay for that. Because this is, again, you have to separate this levy, this portion of the levy.
Yeah.
This is not ongoing operational costs. This is a capital investment. So it's treated differently. So,
Just like the mortgage on your house, whatever that is, you're not paying the whole.
yes.
Right.
We can
You're
knock,
you're paying a payment.
yes. This is the ice center geothermal and, creative financing that we had.
Yeah.
This is the
140.
kind of discussion we can have with this because it's a capital investment. We can't have that kind of discussion with, our ongoing operating costs.
Well, and I think, given that things have changed in the last 8 months, based on the chief's comments tonight. I think it would be prudent for us to look at it and see, get more information on the cost and more information on the franchise fees, and to see what we can do to make it happen.
So to make the garage happen in phase one.
Yes.
Okay. You have 3 votes to make the garage happen in phase one and get us more information. Okay?
Thank you.
Is there anything else? Okay. Thank you,
Mayor.
everybody. Yes, Garrett.
So I just want to recap, direction for the core planning team, when you see a future plan, it'll include the air handling system for
In phase
police in phase one. We'll eliminate any reference to the changing room and shower
Yeah.
spaces, and we will continue with the design and cost estimates related to what it would cost to have a covered vehicle storage in the phase one process. Is that
Phase
correct?
one.
Right.
Phase one.
I just
Yes.
have a question. With the, well, I guess that would, I was wondering, is there any way to determine what the cost would be, the ongoing cost for having a garage, or is that too
Madam
difficult?
Mayor, Councilmember Wynn, I think John had done some,
I-
or Dana, yeah, we talked about
Yeah,
that
we have some,
yesterday.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, we anticipate that, cost estimates generally ballpark for operating costs would be about $20,000 annually. There are some more specific calculations that we can apply based on the actual square footage and what our utility costs are right now in our current building. We can apply that information and get a more exact cost. But ballpark, it's about $20,000 annually, but that doesn't include any deferred maintenance items that would have to be coming in at a future date as well.
It's no different. We have a huge maintenance center on Frontier Lane that stores all of our public works vehicles and all of that. And they can apply the same kind of calculations to a smaller footprint. Yes, Bill?
So just so I'm clear, and Heather, please help me. So September 6th, we have to vote on the max tax. We don't know, apparently, we don't even know I don't right now know how that number will be calculated or what it will be, because all we voted on so far is 3.6, with some inkling that we allow 700,000 to be factored in, and 3-2, we do the garage in the first phase. So now I'm really confused as to when we'll vote on the max tax, and when we'll know what that number might be, so we can decide whether we're going to vote yes or no.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Coughlin, what we'll do is staff will go back and add, maybe two and a quarter and $700,000 to the bonding. We will come back with an annual number associated with a bonding of that amount that we would add to the recommendation for the max tax. So we would add that to the 3.6. This is what I'm hearing, so please correct me if I'm
Right.
wrong. So we would add that. And then, so that would be your certified max tax. That's the amount of, that's the dollar amount upon which all of the individual property tax statements that are mailed out, sort of the draft statements are mailed out to property tax payers. And at that point, as we continue to refine, we think by the end of September, we should be able to get better information on franchise fees. We come back to you for your final budget decision in December. So as of December, we will use all the most recent information that we have associated with the cost for the project as well as for the franchise fees. And then we would reduce that increment that I just talked about by that much. It's what, 250,000 we think? Or Kelly, maybe you could, I know you were working on calculating
250
that.
on the amount to pay back, or the debt service on the,
Correct.
yeah.
Garage?
In the garage, about 250,000.
I think that was at the bottom, that was the bottom for the 2 million, I
The 2
believe,
million,
so.
so it's probably
I
around
think you're-
300,000.
Right, 300 and with the, rough for the 700,000, another 80,000, something like that.
So your rough guess if it would be
About
2.5
1% to 1% to 1.5% on top of the. And
About
that-
$300,000, so another.
That's
yeah.
if nothing changed.
percentage and half.
Right, if the franchise fee didn't change, if we didn't choose to put some of this under our one-time money, that'd be the worst-case scenario, which is the spirit behind the max tax. What's the worst-case scenario?
Yeah, Kelly?
I also have been factoring all of this on a 10-year bond, and we've been doing that because of the way the phasing of the rest of things coming in. We want some to roll off before we
Yeah.
start the fire station and the other things going on.
Yeah.
So if where you were mentioning 15 to 20 years, we would end up with more of an overlap and a difficulty.
And if I remember reading the Moody's and the Standard & Poor's report, in the next 10 years, 80% of our debt will have rolled off. And yes, of course, we'll be adding to the debt, but it's not going to be as much as all of that. But 80% of it is going to be rolling off.
And a longer term is definitely
Yeah.
something that you can consider because it's the life of the asset
Of the
is
asset.
definitely supports that. But the future is that you want to do some more of those assets, so you got to leave some capacity.
Again, just so I'm clear, September 6th is theoretically possible. We could be voting on a 5.6% max tax, even though that may not be the ultimate number.
Actually, 4.5 to 4.8. 4.6
She said
to
1 to 2.
4.8. No, 1 to 1.5 on top of the
We're at
3.6.
3.6, so 1 to 1.5.
6, 5,
Okay, 4.
4, 6, 5, or 5, yeah.
Okay.
Would be the
5.0,
worst-case scenario, and then we'll continue to work and refine the numbers by December.
Which I have no intention on voting on a 5.0 because we have other tools that we haven't talked about yet. So that's just, again, worst-case scenario if we did nothing else and left everything the same as it is today and just lopped this on.
So the three of you have just said, rather than 3.6, you'll accept 5.2.
As a max tax.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Okay,
We're-
so
we're
Bill-
saying
before
that
we do
repla-
that, before we have that max tax vote, let's also have the discussion of the other
John's
things.
writing here, and I want to be sure he understands this, that Bill and I are saying 3.6.
Sure.
Sure.
But
Okay.
again, we don't have all the other tools on the
I
table
just
yet.
told
And
you
we
what I
don't-
want my legacy to be.
Yeah, and,
I don't need a bronze plaque with my name on it.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah. We've been working on this bond rating, and we've held it. But staff has brought the replacement air handling system, and of course, the garage has always been on the table since July of 2014. So that's where it is, and I think that's where we're going to go, and you're going to have some refined numbers. And I am very confident that you all will work with those numbers and bring us, perhaps not 3.6, but it's no more than 4.
Sure. And I'd like to add to that, I'd like to see what our availability is of our unspent funds.
Well, yeah,
Because I really
absolutely.
don't like holding a few $1 million year after year after year for a what-if,
And-
when we have capital investments like this that we're looking at.
Yeah,
There's no reason
and-
for us to continue to hold that.
And
that
Kelly,
sizable
Kelly
amount.
had just showed us that we do have, what is it, 2.7 in the undesignated?
Yes.
Yes. So we have that's sitting
I
there.
just want staff to understand it's not just all about the levy, that I'd like to see those other options before we make that.
Yeah. Okay, so the staff have the direction? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you, Chief Dumoulin and Sergeant McLis, thank you for coming. Okay, the next one is the review of the mayor and council salaries and benefits. Michelle and Jill. Michelle. And this is something that we do every election year.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, City Council members. Yes, I did provide with you a little history on the council salary surveys. The council has, since 2004, increased it once, and that was in 2007, to its current rate. The mayor receives $1,000 per month currently, and the council members receive $700 per month. And we have done some comparisons. We've looked at our market cities and even some other cities that weren't specifically our market cities, but similar in size or maybe in location in Dakota County. And just to give you an idea of what is out there, and with our market cities, we are falling below the average salary, and with, also with this, we are also below with some comparably sized cities that are not within our market area. And at this time, if the council would like to consider any changes to the salary, this is something that would need to be done before the November general election. All of any salary increase would need to be adopted before that time and would not go into effect until January 1st. So there's also some indication here that some of the cities have implemented automatic increases that either coincide with the price index or maybe coincide with like other non-union salary increases. However, that option is less transparent. And I stand for any questions.
Any questions for Michelle? Anybody want to change the salary? Bill?
I think you all deserve a lot more because you work hard enough, but on principle, I'm for not raising the salary, so,
Yeah.
but I believe you guys deserve,
To be at
Paid a
least the
lot more.
average
Yeah.
of, we continue to start to fall behind
Yeah.
now. So when will we have that discussion where we say, okay, you know, after
Not
10,
this
11,
year.
12 years?
Yeah,
Not this year.
yeah.
Yeah. We don't do this for the money, clearly, but we also are
Yeah.
left behind.
Larry?
I agree.
Yeah, okay. No changes.
Thank you.
Okay, we go on to the round table. So the first item on the round table is, I ask Heather, after having so many discussions about outdoor vehicle storage, that I thought that we should have a discussion and direct staff. What is our thought about all of these vehicle storage? And they can either be from, the last one was from Bloomington that wanted to park cars over on the old Knox lumber site. Jenny?
Madam Mayor, it was, I believe, at the Burnsville Center site. It was in the ordinance, the interim ordinance that you've adopted would not have allowed that. So we didn't allow them to do that.
Yeah, so the thing is, what do we want to do? I mean, because there are more and more requests for vehicle storage. New and used, I believe.
Madam Mayor, it's primarily new is what we're
New?
seeing, but I will tell you that staff met with another dealership group yesterday looking for more places to store cars, so this problem continues.
Yeah. Yeah,
Good
and it-
problem, but the problem continues here.
Yeah, and the thing that I look at is this, because we're trying to ensure that we have property that can be redeveloped. And if they are not available for redevelopment, then they become parking lots. And then what happens is that we have, I believe, one of our economic development ends is to increase the tax base. But by doing this, we don't get there. So what would you like to do so that staff can prepare background for us to take a look at? What are the issues, and are there any benefits?
Madam Mayor.
Yes, Mary?
I do think that what's happening is that the automobile dealers, the new car dealers are being pressured by the manufacturers to
Yeah.
carry more inventory.
Yep.
So it's that they're in a tough spot. I mean, they really don't want to do that, but they're being forced to. So, but I don't want to see this land tied up. I mean, now the auto manufacturing industry is probably at a cyclical peak right now. So I would think in a year or two, we might not have this problem. I think that perhaps we can look at some, short-term, interim use for this, so that the property's not tied up. I don't know, perhaps staff has some thought on that.
I would like to hear from Jenny, because I think when we take a look at all of this and what property is available, and I know that we've been trying to work with the shopping center and the Sears site. and if they're going to redevelop that area. And we've been also looking at working with them to redevelop parking areas that are underutilized. So, Jenny.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Sherry, members of the council, I would say that we have two ordinances that address these. So we have a seasonal permit that allows for parking on existing parking lots. That's 6 months out of a 12-month period that these dealers can come in and have a temporary solution when they get an inflow of vehicles. That's what you're seeing at the Burnsville Center. Then there are interim use permits, which are years, based on whatever council approves, and we have a handful of those that were
Oh, my.
approved over the last couple of years. So both cases are on an interim basis. It's just short-term for existing lots, IUPs for longer than that, maybe more semi-permanent in nature until a better use comes along or those leases run out. So
And we
that's
have one of those in the new area that we just did some soils correction.
yes, that one's for 10 years, I believe.
Yeah. Highest and best use?
Council approved
Yes,
it. I don't know what else to say, but
I know,
they made the
I
request
know,
and we brought it before you.
And that's the reason why
Yeah.
I bring this.
Yeah, certainly we can change the ordinance if that's the
Yeah.
direction. Bring back more information, as you said. We're happy to do that.
Bring
Yeah.
back more information.
Bring back more information. That, I think, is what I was hoping. What are the benefits? What are the challenges that we have? Because if we're saying we want to grow the tax base and we can't get there, and then we invest money in correcting soils, and now it's a parking lot, we're not growing the tax base because there's no asset sitting there except a paved parking lot.
Very little.
Just a little, it really
Very
doesn't
little.
help with all of
Yes.
the investment we made in a TIF soils correction district.
Correct. So we can,
That's
what I'm
why I
hearing
bring
you,
this to the table.
what I'm hearing you say, and it seems like there's consensus to bring back more information for a future
Yeah.
work session, discussion, input on,
Yeah. Because
what-
I don't think if you're not thinking about it, and you're not thinking about what our goal is to improve the tax base, and then we invest money in a soils correction district, and, okay, great, thank you. I think that's understood, staff? Okay, thank you, Jenny. The next one is the HOC run as a legacy event. Dan? Because it was, and then it
Yeah.
wasn't, and,
Well, I brought this up because sort of the evolution of what was the legacy event when it was called the Tender Hearts Half Marathon.
Tender
And then
Hearts. Yeah,
it was,
half
for
marathon.
2 years, it was operated by a different organization, but I don't know if they still called it the Tender Hearts Half Marathon at that time.
Yeah, they did for 1 year, and then they changed it, because I was
Yeah.
with the Tender Hearts
Right.
group
And
that
then
did that.
after the second year, they folded, and the event basically was abandoned. And so I came to Craig Ebling and let him know that we would like to do an event, or actually run that event, and continue to keep it going. To benefit the Boys and Girls Club, Kids Feeding Kids program. So through some discussions, Craig was actually the one very instrumental in some great recommendations to change it to a 10K to broaden the appeal. And then ultimately, a decision was made to move it from its June or July, I can't remember what month, but the attendance at the event was dropping because another major marathon event moved dates, and so this was a great warm-up half marathon for those runners going into this full marathon. And after that other full marathon moved its date, it was Minneapolis or Grandma's or one of those, attendance fell off quite significantly. So we decided, well, let's move it to another date, and decided to just move it to become as an event as part of the fire muster. Separate from the fire muster, we have our own board, a different group of people, all volunteers run it, but we put it, we sort of, I would say we partnered with the fire muster on dates to help them fill in originally it was a Sunday morning time slot, then we ended up moving it to Saturday.
when they consolidated things out of Sunday. So through that process, I had discussions with Craig Ebling.
Excuse me, Mayor,
Yeah.
I got to excuse myself.
Okay,
Thank
drive
you.
safely.
Sorry, was I boring you? I know you got to go, long drive back up north. And so he basically said, since you're operating this under, within the fire muster, we would still provide the same 50% support for public safety and public works for the event, but there didn't seem to be a need for it to be a standalone legacy event. And in theory, but he also said that the city would continue to essentially do the same things, like marketing it. The electronic boards, the electronic billboard out on the highway, Burnsville Bulletin, and all those things. And it seemed like a logical decision. And I certainly said, well, that makes sense. It's basically going to be still treated the same, but not officially. And he did note that, and I believe a follow-up meeting with Heather, if I remember, this goes back a couple years ago, that for it to be a legacy event, it needed to have a local beneficiary. And that is, I don't know if it's a nonprofit or some
Madam
sort of,
Mayor,
could you
Councilmember
clarify that?
Keeley, yes, that's part of the council's current policy, is that it has to have a local nonprofit benefit. That's part of the beneficiary. That's part of the council's policy.
Okay, and I said, yeah, I get that. And so, so what caused me to bring this up is what I've noticed is there's been sort of a tailing off of exposure. Still gets in certain things, but I remember back when we first were there for instance, the Burnsville Bulletin, the event got its own brand and spot, an advertisement, basically. And that has turned into a small little text in the list of calendar events under the fire muster. So it's completely lost its own identity and now is one black text in a list of calendar events that is completely lost. And that to me isn't the same as the spirit of the discussion that I had with Craig back when we had our first discussion, and he brought this idea to me and said, maybe the best thing to do is just make it, because there wasn't a local beneficiary, and there wasn't, so I couldn't disagree with that. But it would still be supported 50% and still be getting the same advertising. I just kind of, and maybe the time change of city manager, it's just other shifts, and it's sort of like gotten forgotten because it doesn't sort of have this headliner status as a legacy event. And so I wanted to bring it back to have the discussion. It's an awkward position to sort of have to be the board chair of the event and be on council and asking for this. So really, I'd like to know, does our other legacy events, and you would probably know this, the International Festival and the Fire Muster, give all the proceeds, or some proceeds, I don't even know if it requires all or just some sort of donation, to local charities that meets that qualification? Because if so, we could obviously direct some funds from what is raised to something other than the Kids Feeding Kids. For instance, the Burnsville Youth Collaborative or the music. I can't remember the name of the music deal, but to help that qualification, I guess, put it that way, if that's what's necessary. But I know that sitting on the fire muster as a liaison from the council, I know that Tom has got like the fire soccer's involved, and they actually work the event, and in exchange they get a donation back. But it's and I don't know if that's necessarily a work for pay thing, or it's just like volunteer and we'll make a donation. So there is some give back, and for me it seemed like the events were less about just raising money for a specific charity that happens to be Burnsville based.
They're trying to sustain themselves.
Yeah, and more about the benefit of the community of the event being held in the community, right? And everyone coming together and enjoying the fire muster, enjoying the International Festival,
So are you
or
asking?
enjoying a 10K, 5K
So are you
for a good
asking
cause.
us to revisit the one provision in the legacy event that says you have to give back
Does the International Festival, for instance, do that? Do you write a check with some of your proceeds and donate it to a local charity to be qualified to be a legacy?
You know,
I think, Madam Mayor,
Heather.
it's the Fire Muster and the International Fest are both local nonprofits, and so I don't know that they
Well, the
necessarily.
entity themselves.
Yeah,
The
they-
entity themselves are
Gotcha.
local, whereas in the race that you referred to, that's, I don't think the Boys and Girls Club is a.
Yeah, they don't have a
Yeah.
local
They don't have a
presence,
local
right.
presence, so I
Right.
believe that's. I'm
That's the
sorry,
reason
members,
why,
that-
because I was going to say, the International Festival raises money so it can continue to sustain the event.
Itself,
for
right.
year
And the
af-
event is
yeah,
the
and
greater
it is
good
a
of the
local,
community, right.
and it's a local 501c3.
So it's kind of a technicality. I mean, it's a 501c3, let's say, I don't know what it is, but it's a nonprofit, but it doesn't actually give any money to any nonprofit.
yeah.
It just
It's a local-
sustains
local
itself.
It's a local
Right,
nonprofit.
locally based
It's a locally based nonprofit
Yeah.
that continues to provide a service to the community.
Through the
and-
event,
Through
right.
the event,
Right.
and then sustains itself through
So,
its.
so it is kind of a technicality because I believe that the Heart of the City race provides a benefit to the community, even though it actually raises funds to benefit something outside the community. And it's not a 501c3 based here per se.
Yeah.
But the event itself, much like the International Festival, the event itself is really what brings the community together for healthy reasons. In this case, a 10K, a 5K, and a 1K Kids Fun Run. We bring families, kids, adults, professional runners, and walkers. And it's now a run to remember. We actually bring people together to walk or run in memory of
But,
someone that's
okay,
lost.
so.
So that's the benefit to the community.
So,
So I don't know. I'm not arguing. I don't want to
Yeah,
change
I don't
anything.
know.
I just, to me,
you want to
I
have more,
believe-
you want to have more visibility of your own brand for the race.
sure. And I think the race should be given the same status and support, which it kind of does, but kind of doesn't, right? It gets the public safety, public works support, but doesn't get all the marketing support.
Are you looking for marketing support?
Well, of course. I mean, I again, in the spirit of the discussion that I had with
Yeah.
Craig, nothing was going to change. It was officially going to be taken off the legacy, but it was still going to be getting all the legacy benefits. Literally, that's the discussion I had. So those benefits have been preserved for public safety and public works, but from the marketing side, it's been kind of diluted over time. And so it seems to me that it's obviously going in the wrong direction. So one suggestion is make it a legacy event again, update our legacy to say that, if it has to benefit the community other than just be a nonprofit, that maybe the event itself being put on by volunteers, the event itself actually benefits the community in some way, shape, or form. That it doesn't actually have to either be a nonprofit based in Burnsville or has to write a check. Or maybe we add that element, that if you're a nonprofit that's not based in Burnsville, but the event is held in Burnsville, that some funds go to a local charity. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, well,
Whatever that might be.
that's all
The garage
that's
seems
all
like a
that asks
logical
for,
one.
that you give some money to a local charity.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Madam Mayor,
Heather.
in the interest of time, if you'd like, we certainly could bring back several options for the council's consideration. And we could also give you some additional information at that point in time about
think
what the
that'll be-
difference is
that-
between a
that'll be
legacy
helpful.
event versus another.
Okay,
I would love to see it back as legacy status, and if we need to change our ordinance or our policy to include, some sort of benefit contribution
okay, I
if you're
think-
not based to a local organization, that would work great, because I would love to actually give some to to see some donation go to the
Garage,
Jack
yeah.
Music. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's such a wonderful
Yeah.
organization and
So
outcome of
let's,
that whole thing.
okay, so staff then will bring back some options, and then looking at the, getting back to your legacy
Sure.
status, and then how do you donate money and what that
Yep.
percentage might be.
And unfortunately, this year, it's kind of lost, because
Yeah.
the Burnsville Bulletin went out, and I was kind of taken off guard by
Okay.
what was there, which was next to nothing,
Okay,
and disappointed, obviously.
all right.
Thank you.
Mary, you have anything to report? Nothing. Okay, Suzanne?
Just the Ames, we have a proposed budget, it'll be coming before us soon, and I won't get into it tonight, because it'll come
Sure.
before us shortly, and,
Yeah.
but it's looking good.
Good.
In
Dan,
line with their 5-year.
Okay, Dan?
Nothing I I did not attend the first, could not, actually wanted to with Jenny. I was charged up and ready to go to the Housing and Economic Development. I really wanted to go. And things got chaotic at work and I couldn't get away. And some meetings got thrown on me. But the next one is this Friday. Yeah, so I'm charged up and ready. I feel so bad. I want to go. I want to go. The economic development portion of that sounds very intriguing to me. The housing obviously is interesting too. So I can't report on anything on that.
Okay.
MBTA did not have a meeting, canceled the meeting. And Fire Muster is really gearing up to, in this final stretch of less than 30 days, right? So a lot is going on, and a couple of more frequent meetings are going to happen here very shortly. Let's see. There was one other thing now, I can't remember what, off the top of my head. Oh, the foundation. How could I forget, right, Mary? The Community Foundation. We're having our second meeting tomorrow at lunch at Morgan's. So we're every other month, we're at Morgan's at noon, or 4:30 at Dodge of Burnsville. And everything's going well there. There's some new projects coming down the pipeline that the foundation is going to wrap their arms around, but nothing real major to report.
Okay.
All good stuff.
MLC meets quarterly. I have no report. We have our Metro Cities Policy meeting on Wednesday, and we did not have a Convention and Visitors Bureau meeting last month. I reported to you on our strategic planning meeting, and our next meeting is coming up, so there's nothing to report. And so, Heather, is there anything else from staff? Michelle? Okay, just remember that we do have a canvassing on Thursday,
Yes.
We do.
and that is at
10 a.m.
10 a.m.
Go
Okay?
vote. Everybody go vote
Yeah,
tomorrow.
everybody go vote tomorrow if they're listening. And we stand adjourned by acclamation. Okay. I gotta run to the.